10 figures burst from the tree-line, sickly yellow eyes burning. 9 rode rotten wolves. At the center loomed a 3-meter brute with 2 snarling heads, each trying to outrot the other. Twin-headed rotten wolf, F+. Level 6. Physical, 65. Mental, 0. Will, 0. Sylas's attention slid past the beast to the rider on its back. Zurog, F. Level 1. Physical, 52. Mental, 42. Will, 56. Zurog carried a bloody scythe and a pressure that felt familiar. Not a comprehension exactly, close but off. Around Sylas, faces drained. Olivia looked hollowed out. Even if she couldn't see numbers, her skill would read the grade, and this was worse than the F+ she'd feared. Morgan's knuckles whitened on his hilt. Alex panted, pupils blown, some skill spiking his adrenaline. Lauren hugged her, sword to her chest, fear pouring off her. Kasari was the exception. Pale blue eyes turned steel, one heartbeat from bearing fangs herself. The image almost made Sylas laugh. "Marcus," she snapped. "Lord," a militiaman answered. "You 5 are the wall. No one gets past you." "Not one." "Yes." Spears locked. A line formed at the village throat. Kasari faced the recruits. "I don't know why you 3, 4 haven't run, but I can guess." No one spoke. "Then live long enough to prove yourselves right." Her gaze met Sylas's. He looked amused. Somehow, that steadied her. "Everyone," Sylas said. "Trail me by 20 meters. Don't cross that line until I call it." He moved, not as fast as the charging wolves, but fast enough to clear the fence and by his 20 meters. Madness. It rolled out in a tide. The key at his neck flickered. His green eyes lit the dark. The rotten wolves shattered first. Whatever leash the gnolls had on them was paper thin. If they could truly command packs, why only 6 before? Why 10 now? Every mount, but the twin-headed bucked its rider. Even that one wasn't immune. Its stats had 0 mental and will. Yet Zurog kept his seat as the beast thrashed. Confusion flashed in Gnoll eyes. Wolves turned on riders. Wolves turned on wolves. Madness brushed Zurog. Red crept into his stare before he forced it back, alarm breaking through. The melee spiraled while Sylas held distance. No reason to step in and give anyone a target. Even when madness didn't fully break a mind, it blurred focus and dialed up whatever was already loud inside. When he'd pushed it over their team earlier, Alex had practically imprinted on a bone axe. Lauren, jumpiest of them, shut down. The smarter the target, the more specific the reaction, assuming they couldn't resist. Rotten wolves had no resistance. They went feral on everything near, riders included. Zurog tracked the source. He didn't have to believe it to act on it. Sylas's eyes narrowed as Zurog swung down, severing both heads of his mount in one clean stroke, then launched straight for him. Decisive. Zurog was on him before the thought finished forming. More precisely, the scythe was. Sylas snapped his torso back, and the blade hissed past. A second swing came immediately. Zurog's legs churned like engines, eating a dozen meters in a blink. He moved as if the ground were air, like Kasari, but he didn't seem to spend ether to do it. The scythe gave him reach and leverage. 2 meters of haft, a vicious hooked blade, serrated and hungry. Against bare arms and legs, the matchup was ugly. He had already patched that weakness. A dagger flashed into existence at Zurog's throat inside his guard. Under madness, Sylas's telekinesis hit with a strength and speed of 75 and accelerated almost instantly. Zurog rocked back, slammed the side's heel into the earth to keep balance, and opened his mouth. Ether surged. A puff of black smoke rolled out just as the dagger hung over his nose. Sylas felt control on the blade, ready to pull and reset. The smoke touched steel. The dagger withered to ash. He drove forward to catch Zurog off balance. A boot flicked out and hammered his chest. He crossed his forearms, absorbed the hit, and slid back in a shower of grit. He dug heels and refused to give ground. If he drifted too far, he would have to drop madness, and then he would lose tempo. Zurog recovered at once, grinning, ripping the scythe free and flooding the space with slashes. Sylas slipped left, then right. Whenever he closed, a clean counterweighted. Zurog's ringcraft was a tier above his. Ether pulsed again. Zurog's jaws parted. Sylas rolled aside on instinct. If that fog could erase steel, he didn't want it on skin. Faint. The sides but slammed into his ribs as he moved. Air burst from his lungs. Constitution strained. He skidded, caught a knee and elbow, then rolled under another sweep. Black vapor bled from the blade, trailing in arcs. Sylas! Olivia shouted. A dagger cut the dark with a high whistle and stuck into the dirt nearby. He heard it, couldn't see it, dodge another strike, looked for it, had to move again. Zurog did not stop. Flow on flow. Fists alone were punishing here. No, it isn't the fists. It's my lack of skill. Green irises gleamed. He set his foot. Sudden burst. He crashed the gap and fired a full-body cross. Zurog laughed. Voice like gravel, soaked in poison. Idiot. My scythe owns this range. The hooked edge ghosted behind Sylas's neck as Zurog stepped back and drew the blade across the line. Even a clean punch would only feed the cut. Every warning bell rang. He felt the wind of the pull, the blade coming to reap. Madness control. The world thinned and slowed. An extra second bloomed. His fist landed with a flat crack. Zurog's cheek warped under his knuckles. The sides sang faster behind him. Sylas dropped, pressed up with telekinesis against the blade to shove himself lower, hair lifting as steel skimmed past his scalp. He let go. The sudden release stole a sliver of Zurog's balance. It was small but enough, right? My telekinesis isn't only for me or my gear.
Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
Even though it was currently very limited on heavier objects, and that would likewise apply to weapons being wielded with great strength, as well, as that was even worse than just a heavy weapon. That didn't mean it was useless. Zurog regained his balance, snarling. He could still feel that heavy punch, and it had jarred him quite seriously. Behind him, his rotten wolves and companions were still ripping each other apart. His heart was truly bleeding. The entire Knoll village had been wiped out by these people. He could feel a dense rage bubbling up within him. Unbeknownst to Zurog and even Sylas, madness had inexplicably taken hold. Zurog roared and slashed out, his ether spinning freely as a blade jetted out towards Sylas. Sylas' eyes widened. He hadn't been expecting this at all. Sudden burst. He rushed to the side, feeling the ache in his body after using the gene talent so soon after the first time. At the same time, he could feel that madness control was already running out, and he didn't feel any closer to winning this battle. Zurog released another wild strike, and Sylas felt that he was beginning to retreat too much. Even if Kasari and the other retreated, what about the militiamen and the villagers? If his madness enveloped them, there was no telling what could happen. Focus. Think. Even though he told himself this, he had no idea how to deal with this situation. All this time, he had been relying on fighting entertainment he had watched back on Earth to barely inform his fighting style. But nowhere in those matches would there be a weaponless man going up against a polearm like this, and definitely not a scythe of all things. Even worse, by now he had completely lost track of the dagger that Olivia had thrown. He still knew around where it had landed, but no matter how much he looked for it in that region, he found nothing. However, he finally found some hope to cling on to. He realized that Zurog's attacks had become more dangerous, but he was even more focused on Sylas than he had been before. As Sylas made a subtle attempt to lead him in a different direction, the Knoll elite unhesitatingly followed. Fatigue was beginning to take hold, and maddened control was moments away from not having any ether to draw on. Sylas slipped past another attack and down the elixir that Kasari had given him. He suddenly felt a wild rush of ether flood his body, and his eyes widened. It was more than he could handle. It was only an elixir, so he hadn't thought much about it, but Sylas had forgotten that his intelligence was incredibly weak. He felt a bulge in his stomach area, but luckily it didn't feel too dangerous. He could only let the ether leak out of him, his body clearly incapable of handling anything more than this. Sylas felt something odd. It was like the reverse of maddened meditation. The ether had nowhere to go, and so it naturally flowed out of him. But when he used maddened meditation, it was as though the opposite was created, almost as though his body was suddenly the point of low concentration it needed to come to. A scythe's blade appeared before Sylas. With his madness control still in effect, he found it just as easy to dodge, his control over himself at a peak. His eyes seemed to glaze over as he comprehended something. Skill, maddened meditation, has evolved into maddened enlightenment. Maddened enlightenment has reached fragmented mastery. Maddened enlightenment, FF+. You are deeply in tune with the madness of your ancestors. It helps you to focus, relax, and form a oneness with the world. Understanding yourself is a form of peace, but understanding your place in the world makes you enlightened. Your understanding of madness control has deepened. Madness control has reached bronze mastery. Sylas' head ducked under a scythe's blade, and he suddenly felt like he could see with far more than his eyes. He looked in the direction of the fallen dagger again. His eyes still saw nothing, but for some reason, he could feel it. His telekinesis tugged, and the dagger rushed over with 75 speed. Madness, which had been about to run out as well, suddenly snapped back into focus, and his mind felt like it had just expanded. Zurog couldn't even react as a dagger suddenly plunged deeply into his back. Unfortunately, there was armor there much thicker and more substantial than anything the other gnolls had been wearing. Even so, Sylas didn't regret it. The sudden attack from the back sent a spike of fear through the gnoll elite, whose eyes suddenly cleared somewhat as he looked for his attacker. Taking advantage, Sylas pressed his advantage, closing in and drawing a hook across the gnoll's snout. Zurog's teeth flew and blood splattered, but he reacted quickly, his ether rumbling again. Faint. Sylas concluded this without the slightest change in expression and unloaded an elbow across Zurog's snout before unleashing a knee right into his crotch. One of Zurog's hands released from his scythe in an attempt to swipe at Sylas while his scythe pulled back once again. The same trick won't work twice. Zurog seemed to have already forgotten about the dagger because when it suddenly moved, pulling out from his back and slashing against his wrists, his cry of agony was as much of pain as it was of surprise. His fingers loosened their grip as his scythe fell to the ground, and his body became a punching bag, a barrage of fists and kicks, each one flowing seamlessly from the last, bore down on the gnoll elite. The feeling of rotten flesh and putrid blood flying through the air seemed to fuel Sylas all the more. Faster, sharper, more fluid. Tail whip. His shin collided with the side of the gnoll elite's head, causing sprays of blood to flow. Ether moved within Zurog again, a last-ditch effort. But it was clear that he had wasted too much of it earlier, and while Sylas was seemingly a funnel for ether in the surroundings, Zurog had no such ability. And it was much too late. Sylas' fist moved like the wind, the darkness not seeming to bother him as much any longer as he drove a fist right through the gnoll elite's head. At the same time, his dagger drove into the back of his skull. The two-pronged attack skewered the gnoll. The last of his strength sputtered as he fell to his knees, his eyes filled with disbelief up until the moment they finally dimmed. Sylas stood there, huffing deep breaths. This was it. The flow of battle. 10 out of 10 fluid attack transitions. Sylas tilted his head up to the skies, breathing heavily. Blood trickled down his body from various wounds, but oddly enough his scorned wraps always seemed to remain dry. The moon was a beautiful crescent, and the stars were twinkling in their own beautiful orchestra. It was the kind of sight you couldn't normally see on Earth, at least not where he lived. But even so, it felt so benign compared to the feelings rushing through his body right at this moment. By this point, he was certain that he was some kind of deviant. He wasn't sure what was so fun about putting your life on the line constantly, but maybe he should have known that he had these sorts of proclivities the moment he clicked, yes. He could faintly hear Kasari making a victory speech and the celebration of the villagers, but he tuned it all out as he basked in the feeling. I know that face. Sylas didn't know how long he stood there, but the voice came so suddenly that he was almost startled. Only after he looked over did he realize it was Kasari. "We need to go clear the Knoll village," Sylas suddenly said. "Don't try to change the subject, Sylas," Kasari said with an almost creepy grin, as though she had caught him doing something dirty. "If you had a mirror here, you'd probably be jacking off to your own reflection. Don't think that just because you're not wearing a shit-eating grin that I don't know what you're thinking." Sylas wasn't even surprised by the crude words. She had a model's looks and a sailor's mouth. It was probably Newton's fourth law that Kasari had to cuss at least once for every sentence she spoke in a day. "Accusing me of such things when you clicked yes to is kind of hypocritical, don't you think?" He wasn't looking at her expression, so he didn't see the odd look in her eyes when he said that. What he did hear, though, was her quippy response. "Deflecting again, huh? Well, I can't say you don't deserve it this time, just don't get in over your head." Sylas finally sent her a glance and blinked. "You look tired." She did. Her hair had lost all its volume due to the sweat and blood, and her eyes seemed to have lost some of its usual brightness. In response, though, she rolled her eyes. "You still haven't learned how to talk to women. I believe the words you were looking for are, 'You look perfect.'" Sylas actually chuckled a bit, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. He looked her up and down and shook his head. "No, you definitely look like a hot mess." Kasari flipped her sweat-matted hair. Emphasis on hot. "Thank you very much. Now go get some rest yourself. We're in no state to raid a village right now. Although there shouldn't be any other gnolls. Who knows what's out there?" Sylas shook his head. "We can't risk that." There was something very odd about the leader, especially those zombie wolves too. "I think the secret is in or near the village." Kasari hesitated. She really just wanted to sleep, and her mind was filled with worry about who she'd even put on guard duty for the night. All the militiamen and the quest takers were completely spent. She really didn't want to deal with this right now, especially since the main threat was gone. "But I'll go. It isn't a problem. I'll be back before the night is through, so long as everything goes well." Kasari bit her lip. "Are you sure?" "Yes." She hesitated before she steeled herself. "Then, are you willing to join Castlemaine? As an official member, I mean. There's a system that allows the recruitment of adventurers. It's a slightly different path than the usual villager spawning path. I think that's what the others want to do, too." Her voice trailed off. It was clear to her that Morgan, Lauren, and Alex saw this as more than just a quest. They saw it as hope to not have to spend every second looking over their shoulders. This was the real reason they had stayed. They really didn't want to have to go back. Castlemaine was the #1 ranked human territory. If they didn't join her, then who would they join? "I would love to, but I can't," Sylas replied. Kasari's expression dimmed a bit. But what she didn't expect was to suddenly see Sylas' status screen in front of her. Name, Sylas Grimblade. Species, human F. Affiliation, Grimblade lineage. Level, 0. Titles, A Flexible Will, Skill Savant, FFF+. Madness Conqueror, FF. A Patient Stalker, F. Physical, 50. Strength, 50. Constitution, 50. Dexterity, 50. Speed, 50. Mental, 47. Intelligence, 10. Wisdom, 10. Charisma, 122. Will, 94. Luck, 1. Skills, Madness Control, FF+. Basic Scouting, F. Madden Enlightenment, FF+. Comprehensions, Madness, FFF. Gene State, Soft. Fragmented Genes, Grimblade Lineage, F. 8. Dexterity, F. 6. Constitution, F. 6. Strength, F. Common Genes, 3. Speed, F. 3. Strength, F. 2. Constitution, F. 3. Dexterity, F. Gene Talents, Blade Aura, unranked. Sudden Burst, F. Tail Whip, F. Kasari's eyes widened. Holy shit, Syl. She felt like her head was spinning. Setting aside the fact showing someone your full status window was basically unheard of. What she was seeing was ridiculous. There was a long list of cusses and things she wanted to say, but she eventually bit her tongue, pulling Sylas away to a location that was even further from everyone else. As you can see, I have an affiliation already, and it's not convenient to try to change it now. I can't join, not because I don't want to, but because I can't. That's not the point, Syl, as she hissed. You can't just go around showing people your stats like that. Sylas raised an eyebrow. Do you think that I would just show it to anyone? Kasari's mouth opened to respond, but she realized she didn't have an immediate quippy reply and chose to look away instead, pretending to be irritated. Forget it. Why are your stats so ridiculous, anyway? How are they so high when you're not even level 1? You don't even have a class. What's the normal cap? Sylas asked. Honestly, he would be lying if he said this wasn't one of the reasons he had chosen to reveal it like this. He wanted to know more about how he stacked up to others. The usual stat limit is 25. Some people who were particularly good athletes back on Earth and such, can push it to 30. But 50 is asinine. You can only get that with a class or by leveling up. Sylas nodded slowly. He knew that his Grimblade lineage did help him, but he didn't expect it to be so much. If his stat limit was already so high, how high were the Grimblades with the unmutated version of the lineage? But you actually have a comprehension. It's no wonder you're so ridiculous. I've never seen one of those before. No one even knows how to get one. And why is your intelligence so stupidly low? Somehow, it's your charisma carrying your mental stat? There's some god out there having a good laugh at this bullshit. Is it? Kasari frowned and gave Sylas a deep look. This is completely unlike you. You know so little, and we've already been here for 3 months. What happened to the professor? Sylas looked a bit surprised. You know I'm a professor? Idiot. You're practically a mini-celebrity. It's not every day Viridian appoints a new tenured professor. It was in a few local newspapers. Oh, Sylas nodded. He did remember doing a few photo shoots, much to his distaste. He hated taking photos. So, you don't know anything about comprehensions? Kasari shook her head. No one I've come across has one, and unlike everything else, there doesn't seem to be an obvious path toward getting one either. Then what about classes? You can get them. Both yes and no. I've learned that there are 2 ways to get a class. The first is to stumble into a class dungeon or a class-themed QuickTime event. The second is to wait until you're level 10. Then you will receive a system award that guides you toward a class you've earned, I guess. Is one path better than the other? Again, it depends. It's possible to run into a bronze class in a QuickTime event, for example, and it might be better than to take it than to wait until you're level 10 and hope you've done enough to earn a bronze class quest. Plus, you can skip the quest in the case of a class dungeon of a class-themed QuickTime event because the events themselves are the quest. So a bronze class is really rare then? Kasari smiled bitterly and nodded. I heard news in the Nexus about a common class QuickTime event triggering, and it was a complete bloodbath. No one who chose to participate even survived. It's not a last man standing sort of thing. If you don't meet the requirements, you're finished. But I've also heard of some powerful people hoarding classes as well. They'll join the QuickTime events, but then not even absorb the class crystal. Sylas' brows raised, so that was possible too. You would have to keep that in mind. Can you change your class? Sylas asked. I'm not sure, honestly. There's probably a price to pay for an attempt. Nothing ever comes free in this world. So, you've already chosen your class, then? Kasari shook her head and waved a hand. Name, Kasari Hale. Species, human F. Affiliation, Castlemaine. Class, empty. Level, 0. Titles, Executioner Sweeper F. Physical, 28. Strength, 28. Constitution, 28. Dexterity, 28. Speed, 28. Mental, 32. Intelligence, 69. Wisdom, 22. Charisma, 5. Will, 32. Luck, 5. Skills, Sharpen F. Basic Scouting F. Accelerate F. Executions Blade F+. Withstand FF. Comprehensions. Gene State, Inflexible. Fragmented Genes. Common Genes, 2 Intelligence F. Will F. Gene Talents, Harden F+. Sylas was surprised seeing this screen, mostly because it didn't make much sense to him. How could she have so few genes, but have so many stats? Did she gain stats through other means? Wait, the system messages made a distinction between gene limits and stat limits, but I've been thinking of them interchangeably. But what is the meaningful difference between the two? I've been able to gather more genes than my stats allow me to display, but why? And Kasari seems to have done the opposite, gathered more stats than her genes would otherwise suggest was possible. What's the purpose of the distinction? Seeing Sylas immediately lose himself in thought, Kasari couldn't help but roll her eyes again, but she didn't interrupt. Now that he thought about it, that elixir had been able to increase his wisdom, but he didn't gain a gene for it. So was that how Kasari had done it? She certainly had the wealth to attempt it, but it felt like he was missing something deeper. Why is there a distinction between gene limits and stat limits? Why is there a distinction between gene limits and stat limits? A body that has more genes than stats is considered to be in a state of wealth. The body is healthier, bounces back from damage with greater ease, and can unlock higher stat limits through rigorous physical training over long, extended periods of time. A body with more stats than genes is considered to be in a state of expenditure. This is usually achieved through methods of elixir drinking and treasure consuming, a path usually taken by the rich, affluent, and lazy. Such a body will be filled with impurities and break down under constant usage. Sylas frowned. He didn't like that. Obviously, he was in this so-called state of wealth, but Kasari was not. But as much as he wanted to help her, he only had one more soft gene state elixir, and he couldn't give it to her. However, he did have a brittle gene state elixir that would last for 3 days. Though it wasn't as good as a 50% boost, 30% was definitely far better than her current 10%. I still don't know how rare this stuff is, Sylas thought as his frown deepened. Let's see what the quest rewards are first. Who knows? Maybe she'll get an even better elixir. At that point, I can help her out with the genes. Diverting his resources wasn't a smart choice. He felt like concentrating things on him was the best bet, but he also couldn't let Kasari continuously put this kind of strain on her body every time she fought. Don't try to gather the rewards from the gnolls until I get back, Sylas suddenly said. Kasari blinked at the sudden change, but eventually nodded. Sylas ran through the forest swiftly. There was still a halo of fatigue looming over him, but he felt that they couldn't be so casual to wait for the morning before getting things done. It was also a clear sign of trust that Kasari had allowed him to go as well. Had it been anyone else, Sylas was well aware that she would have insisted he stay. The value of a city was clear and obvious, and letting Sylas go and claim one that had spawned several F+ warriors and an FF warrior spoke volumes. At the same time, though, Sylas was pretty much the only one who still had the legs to do this. Why do I feel like this? Sylas questioned himself as he continued to run. It felt like he was missing something, but he had an easy path toward figuring out what it was. This was unusual for him. He didn't usually act without a solid understanding or a plan. This time, he was purely acting for the sake of lessening risk. That will have to be enough. Where did Sylas go? Olivia asked, a frown on her face. She had been helping the militiamen and the other reorganize the village and settle everyone down while spreading news of their success. She had seen Kasari pull Sylas away, so she didn't interrupt. But then Sylas suddenly ran off. I sent him on a mission, Kasari replied. The Knoll village? Olivia asked questioningly. Kasari smiled, but didn't respond. Everyone began to gather up, realizing that something was wrong as well. But it was also hard for them to say much too. It was clear that Sylas was the largest contributor here. Don't worry, Sylas will be back soon. Then, we can split up the rewards. I'm also sure that once he's done, you'll also receive your quest rewards as well. They frowned, a hint of uneasiness in their eyes. But ultimately, they nodded. Alex smiled, raising up his bone axe. Getting this for so cheap was already enough reward for me. Take as much time as you need. I'm going to sleep. Morgan hesitated to speak, but he shook his head and held his tongue. Right now, flying under the banner of Castlemaine would only be a benefit to them. Rather than talking and complaining, it was best to watch and see how this would play out. Will he be okay? Lauren asked with a frown. There are more threats out there than just the gnolls. The village's location is already starting to get a bit deeper into the forest. We should have waited until the morning. Kasari nodded. I understand your concerns, but right now Sylas is the only one amongst us in fighting condition, and too many things can happen between now and when we're ready to move out again. This is just to minimize risk. You've also seen his strength. If things are going left, he can definitely retreat. Kasari spoke out Sylas' reasoning, as though it was her own to appease everyone, and they slowly dispersed once more. Sylas locked eyes on a far more substantial wall. Compared to Castlemaine, Knoll Village 019 had a line of half-logs deeply entrenched in the ground. As opposed to looking like a suburban fence, it really looked like it could stop a great deal of people. It was especially imposing in the night, standing a good 3 meters out of the ground. There didn't seem to be any easy access seams to it, and if there was a gate, it was difficult to locate in the darkness. Still, it wasn't bad. 3 meters would be tough for an average human to climb, especially with no obvious footholds or things of the like. But for Sylas, he was a single wall jump from grabbing the top of the walls, smoothly pulling himself up and over. He landed softly as he was immediately hit by a terrible stench. It was like all the smells of the rotten wolves had concentrated and settled down here, trapped by the tall walls that surrounded the village. It was hard to make out details with the moon covered by the foliage of the thick trees, but the village itself was a mess as well, even aside from the foul stench. The tents were hardly tents, but rather beast skins riddled with holes. They seemed to shit and piss in random locations, adding to the vomit-inducing aroma. And in the unorganized mess, Sylas couldn't even easily pick out where the head Knoll would have slept. There should be some indication. Kasari's city steel had a glow to it. Sylas carefully moved around, lamenting the fact he didn't even have shoes to wear in this godforsaken place. What he didn't expect was that he would find something else before the city steel. Rotten Wolf Den, F+. Level, 6. Spawn rate, 3. Mutation rate, 0.01. It was an inconspicuous stone buried in the ground. It was sleek and smooth, and had Sylas not accidentally stepped on it, he was fairly certain that he would have missed it. Claim den. Yes, no. Warning. Moving a recently occupied den will lead to a period of dormancy. Sylas' brows shot up again. These things can be claimed like cities? Does that mean that if I gave this to Kasari, she'd be able to spawn those rotten wolves to fight on her behalf? But is that even a good thing? They completely turned on their masters, and the Knoll head didn't dare to charge with all of them at once. What are dens? Dens are special steels that spawn beasts or special races. They are classified by their grade, which decides the strength of spawned beasts, their level, which decides the level of the spawned beasts, their spawn rate, which decides how many beasts are spawned per day, and their mutation rate, which decides how frequently a stronger beast would spawn. A mutation rate can be between 0.00 and 1.00, where the former is a 0% chance and the latter is a 100% chance. When a mutation is triggered, no matter the spawn rate, only one beast will appear. It is ill-advised to use a den without a beastmaster professional on hand. Beasts, unlike spawned humanoids, are notorious for their low loyalty, and this is especially so for specialty dens such as undead dens, mythical dens, and legendary dens. Should this advice be ignored, be prepared for a battle within your own walls. Sylas took a breath after he read it. It seemed that dens were a double-edged sword, and this should be an undead Denver. But in that case, how had Zurog controlled them? When Sylas found the city steel, he got his answer. Class steel. Lurker of the night. Fragmented. The darkness calls to you, and the occult is your friend. You are a mere fledgling, but you are eager and willing to sacrifice happiness and contentment for suffering and greed. Plus 30 intelligence. Plus 30 will. Class modifiers. 0.1 intelligence. 0.1 will. Uses remaining 9/10. So, it's possible to get a class like this as well. Seems it even allows you to pass it on to multiple people. This should be that odd feeling I was getting from the Knoll head. That was something like a comprehension, but not quite. The class modifier was the most interesting line to Sylas. If he was correct, that 0.1 should mean that it improved your stat limit by 10%, but at the same time, it was a worry to him. It meant that something else he was dreading happened to be true as well. There was a stat limit up ahead for his mental stats and will. Sylas had been wondering if he would ever run into one. Maybe it was possible that those stats would increase to the point his poor physical wouldn't matter. Who knew? Maybe the human race could have become a race of psychics rather than warriors. But this was a clear sign that that was impossible. It seems that this world will really be like a game. Usually, for a game to have any sort of balance, you couldn't have someone like Sylas who could have perfect stats across the board. It seemed that the real distinction between stats and one's strengths and weaknesses would only really begin to show after everyone got their class modifiers. Sylas put the class Stele away. Sylas' gaze flickered with disgust. Thanks to the light of the city Stele, he could see a bit better in here. At the corner of the tent, there was a corpse lying there, one that looked like it had been dissected, or even eaten. He recognized it immediately by the strewn about arrows and the poison-tipped crossbow bolts. It was Lurk. Despite his disgust, Sylas still went over and placed a hand on the corpse. Maybe he would be able to get the genes he had missed out on. Unfortunately, he had no such luck. Other than a disgusting feeling in his palm, there was no other feedback. He shook his head and turned his attention to the city Stele and put a hand on it. View city status. Conquer city Stele. There's no internexus option. He pushed his intention toward conquering, and a blinding light shot into the skies. Even though he was standing within a tent, he could feel it clearly. The light had pretended as though the tent wasn't even there. Conquer sequence triggered. Time to success, 59 seconds. Time to success, 58 seconds. Time to success, 57 seconds. Sylas' frown deepened. He didn't have to stand here. He could even more his hand away. But he didn't like the fact he had just lit up the night sky in an otherwise completely dark forest. Would beasts make their way here? What the hell? Why is the description of this place so vague? The informant said it was around here somewhere. Let's just keep looking. They should be locked in a battle right now. We have time. In the night, two men walked, one clearly more peeved than the other. Both were dressed in cloaks that looked quite similar in style to one another. There were faint hues of purple that shone beneath the sparse moonlight that made it through the thick foliage, and their heads were covered in hoods and partial masks. Suddenly, a blinding ray of light reached them. What the hell? Max, isn't that a conquering sequence? Didn't you say they were in battle? Forget that. Hurry up. Max shot forward, his speed exceptional. He seemed to leap from the ground onto the branches of some trees as though they were just a step away, while his irritable companion followed up. Cover me, Jared. Max called out, his voice much more restrained. This Knoll village spawned with a Denver. We can't give it up. Time to success, 21 seconds. Sylas kept looking at the timer, but he was on full alert. The walls should actually be a benefit to him this time, so he didn't make any rash movements, remaining as still as possible. He remembered how difficult it had been for him to find the location of the city Stele, even when there weren't any individuals to stop him. Even if a beast or even a person saw the blinding flash of light, they would only have a general location and nothing too exact. His ears twitched. That's not a beast. The person was exceptionally light on their feet, but the moment Sylas heard the silent scuffles and dull thump, it felt like a hand had wrapped around his heart. Someone was here. He moved, shifting his position in the tent. This person, assuming they know what that flash of light was, will know that there's someone here. If that's the case, they won't take a normal approach to checking the tents. They'll either launch an all-out attack from the outside, or they'll just get rid of the tent in the fastest way possible, maybe even throwing it into the air. It's also possible that there's a scouting skill similar to Olivia's that could ignore any cover. Sylas was torn. In one case, the person would expose themselves first and he could take advantage. In the second, he would be a sitting duck waiting for a person's response. He made a decision in his heart and counted the seconds in his head. After 3, he unleashed madness. Max frowned, feeling a sudden assault on his mind that he wasn't ready for. His eyes went red as he was creeping forward, and his baser instincts almost took over. A mental attack? What is this? He had never run into such a thing before. The effects of Sylas' madness were unlike anything he had faced. Off in the distance, high in the trees, Jared held a bow, a frown on his face. His eyes glowed as he activated a skill that sharpened his vision. He could see the target, and he was sure that Max could too. So why wasn't he moving? On the ground, Sylas slipped out of the tent, moving, shifting to the side of an adjacent tent until he caught sight of his target. Maximilian Cooper, F. Level 4. Physical, 62. Mental, 51. Will, 55. Sylas' gaze sharpened. Those stats. He had to kill this man fast before he locked onto him. He was just about to use his dagger when he heard the whistling. Sylas had already been through one archer attack before, and on such high alert, he heard it as clear as if a beast was roaring into his ears. Without hesitation, he dove to the side. He could barely see a streak of blue through the night, and he didn't even have the time to understand just what was happening when he actually saw the arrow curve in the air. He had reacted quickly, but still not quickly enough. The arrow grazed his shoulder, leaving a deep groove that would probably require 2 or 3 dozen stitches. It was a ghastly wound that left his arm feeling almost limp. Sylas couldn't believe he had just survived a battle of such terrible proportions, only to land himself in this situation immediately afterward. Sylas couldn't believe he had just survived a battle of such terrible proportions, only to land himself in this situation. There was a dull bang as the arrow cut out a small crater in the ground. Max's head snapped in the direction of Sylas, using the location the arrow had landed in as a guide. Not good. Sylas' mind spun like a churning engine. He used his momentum to roll to his feet, springing up and hugging the walls of the village. The only way to stay out of the archer's line of sight was to keep close to the walls, or more accurately, the side of the walls the arrow had come from. If they wanted to target him from that position, they could have to come closer or even climb atop the walls themselves. If they didn't dare to, then they would essentially be co-signing their partner in crime to a one-on-one battle. Sylas' jaw steeled. He realized that maybe this group wouldn't find that to be so bad. He was completely outmatched, and he barely had time to wonder about why his scan worked when this man's mental was greater than his own before he was forced to duck again. Max suddenly appeared by him, using a skill or maybe a gene talent that reminded him of Sudden Burst. However, Sylas could practically feel him approaching from the side. The moment Max's acceleration skill came to an end, Sylas activated his own, just barely dodging out of the way as an arrow soared over his head. Sylas spun around, his back slamming into the wall of logs as he faced Max, his green eyes glistening. He activated Madness Control and Maddened Enlightenment at the same time. All around, ether began to gather, and the situation became vaguely illuminated, allowing Sylas to see more of the situation than just barely outlined shadows and streaking arrows. At this point, he was certain that these two had some sort of night vision skill or gene talent. There was no way that Archer could target him from so far away without one. In that case, he had nothing to lose by doing this. Max subconsciously blinked as his eyes were assaulted by the sudden light. Sylas was taken aback, but his reaction was quicker than his shock. Out of the Archer's line of sight, he used the full brunt of his telekinesis. Olivia's dagger cut through the air like it had shot out of a cannon. Sylas poured everything he had into it. Max barely managed to recover, sensing that something was wrong. He tilted to the side, but he wasn't fast enough to stop the dagger from tearing right into his shoulder. His left arm immediately went limp. Sylas tried to draw the blade across his body, but the resistance was too strong. With the combination of madness and the blade, the piercing power had the effectiveness of around 150 points of strength, but there were too many other variables at play to end it all in a single strike. A pained cry left Max's lips, and Sylas knew that he was running out of time. That Archer would be here soon. Sylas moved forward his stride so long he closed the distance in a single bound. Max moved to counter, but Sylas' telekinesis ripped the dagger out of shoulder right at that moment, sending another spike of pain through the latter's body that caused that saber he was holding in his hand to falter. Sylas' fist slammed into his nose, and Max's world felt like it was suddenly spinning. Was he going to die like this? It was then Sylas heard it. Even in this situation, his mind was on high alert. A wave of light passed through the region as the village officially fell under his control, and at the same moment, Jared appeared on the village walls, his bowstring already pulled into a full moon position. It also seemed that Jared's night vision skill was on another level compared to Max's because he seemed entirely unfazed by the sudden light. What he wasn't unfazed by, though, was Sylas suddenly round to Max's back, grabbing Olivia's dagger and holding it to the latter's throat. Or, rather, it looked like he had done so. In reality, his telekinesis was holding it a few centimeters from his palm. Jared froze, and Max suddenly didn't dare to move. Sylas' breathing was haggard, but his gaze was sharp and controlled. "Who are you?" he asked coldly. Jared didn't reply, and Max didn't dare to speak. Sylas pressed the dagger more forcefully on Max's neck, drawing blood. "I asked a question." "It's a stupid question," Jared eventually responded. "Why would tell you who we are change anything?" Sylas didn't reply immediately. Was it a stupid question? Of course not. Jared was just pretending like it was. Sylas had asked for a very specific reason, and that was because he didn't think it was a coincidence that these people were here. Someone had told them about this location. It could be one of the 3 quest takers, or it could be that another village run by humans had found it. It wasn't like Knoll Village 019 was marked for Castleman alone. Anyone could clear it. Rather than being a stupid question, it was the most important question. Just when Jared was trying to figure out what to do in this situation, Sylas drew the dagger across Max's neck. It was so sudden and abrupt that Jared didn't even know how to react for a moment. And when he did finally react, there was nothing but rage in his eyes. He released an arrow in pure fury, but aiming for Sylas' head. At this range, his archery skill was more than high enough not to miss. Unfortunately for him, Sylas had the initiative. He had already ducked the moment he cut Max's throat. The arrow was swift, almost undodgeable. But even when it curved toward its target, it ended up running right into Max's chest. Sylas had already seen that the homing ability of Jared's arrows was far too limited to round such a tight corner. He kicked Max's body away when its use had run out, and a crossbow bolt appeared out of his madness key. Jared had already begun drawing out another arrow from his quiver, but how could he be faster than Sylas' telekinesis? The bolt shot up and through the skies, appearing before Jared's head in an instant. The archer might have been slow to draw his arrow, but his speed and agility were great. It was what he focused on most of all. He barely managed to tilt his head to the side, barely dodging. The arrow grazed across his cheek, and his evasive maneuver put him off balance. Sylas immediately pulled out a second arrow, and it rocketed through the skies. But what he didn't expect was that Jared would suddenly go limp, his body never managing to regain its balance. Jared stared out into space, wide-eyed and disbelieving. Poison, his body froze. He was very much still alive, but his body was entirely paralyzed. Even Sylas was stunned. It worked so fast. Sylas took deep breaths, exhaling slowly. Most venoms, even potent ones, took hours to kill. Even among the fastest, a quarter to a half hour was a necessity. But Jared had barely been nicked, and yet he ended up in such a state before he could even fall to the ground. Venoms in this world probably work by attacking constitution. Considering his speed and dexterity, he likely focused on them more than constitution. Though it's hard to say. There's also a chance that the poison is just that powerful. But where did that Knoll find it? Jared fell from the top of the log walls, unable to balance himself. Sylas didn't bother to try to catch him. A 3-meter fall wouldn't kill a level 4, and even if it did, he wasn't sure if he would care. He had moved without hesitation to kill Max, and he didn't even feel very much different now that that had settled in. Max was the first human he had killed, and he even knew his full name. It was just that he couldn't be bothered to care. If he had killed Max without reason, then maybe he would feel differently. But he would never do such a thing to begin with. From the beginning, Max and Jared had approached with thoughts of dealing with him. That much was clear. That initial arrow was definitely meant to kill. Since that was the case, He didn't see a reason to second-guess himself. Morality and grace were the privilege of those living in times of peace. Things like philosophy or sociology could only be pined over and parsed after your ancestors had done all the fighting for you. It was ironic. Sylas had a conversation with Lauren not long ago about keeping as much of your original self in this cruel world as you could, but he didn't really feel like he was changing at all right now. He felt like he was becoming more of himself. He finally caught his breath and stepped forward. Jared's eyes widened with terror as Sylas grabbed him. "Can you speak?" The corners of Jared's mouth twitched and spasmed, but nothing came out. Since he was useless, Sylas drew the blade across his throat as well. Jared's pupils trembled with shock and resignation. But maybe the cruelest part was that he couldn't even feel himself dying. All he felt was numbness. There shouldn't be a third person. If there was, they would have either shown up by now, or they went to report. I guess I should try to get out of here as fast as I can. Sylas rushed back to the city steel and stored away. He did want a city of his own, but not yet. After seeing the bronze city steel of the Grimblade family, he really couldn't see himself settling for anything less. At the very least, he had to reach that stage, or everything he was doing would be meaningless. When he came back to the edge of the village, he began to go through Max and Jared's corpses. They were obviously equipped with excellent stuff. He just had to be careful with touching it, so that the scorned wraps didn't ruin everything. Home Bow F. Level 3, plus 14 dexterity. Ability, homing. A target locked upon with your will be tracked down by your arrows. Durability, 9 out of 10. Rushing Saber F. Level 4, plus 16 speed. Ability, sudden burst. Reach your top speed instantaneously in exchange for 1 point of durability. Durability, 17/20. Leather chest armor F. Level 4, plus 6 constitution. Ability, sturdy. Withstand a near fatal wound and attack with 5% more of your maximum strength in exchange for remaining durability. Durability, 4 out of 10. They both wore the same armor with the same abilities. But comparing this to what he had seen from Kasari's armor made him realize that there was a sheer night and day difference. That Maya Sinclair really was an invaluable strategic resource. Her level 2 armors could provide plus 100 constitution compared to this that wasn't even in the double digits. He could hardly fathom why the gap was so large. Sylas stood ready to move out, but then he stopped and looked back toward the corpses. He knew why he hadn't thought of checking their genes. They were humans, not the beasts or mythical creatures he had fought before. They were real. They deserved to be seen as something more than just resources to collect, right? Sylas bent down and pressed his hand to Max's corpse. Maximilian Cooper. Gene detected. Common gene. 2. Strength F. 2. Constitution F. 3. Intelligence F. 1. Wisdom F. 2. Will F. Attempt assimilation? Yes, no. Sylas paused. It was as expected. This system had no special place for humans in its heart. To it, they were no different from any other species, a people that could be easily replicated through their superior technology and butchered no different from the common animal. Sylas pushed his intention toward yes. Since there were the two of them here, and he had just learned that there was likely a limit to his mental stats as well, he wanted to see how far it would go. Gene assimilation starting. Gene assimilation triggered. Genes successfully assimilated. Common gene, 1. Strength F. 1. Constitution F. 3. Intelligence F. 1. Wisdom F. 1. Will F. Genes failed assimilation. Common gene, 1. Strength F. 1. Constitution F. 1. Will F. The pain hit Sylas like a truck, but this time, rather than being in his body, it felt like his mind was being forcefully split in two. Mental stat has reached 50 and cannot increase further. Species limit has been reached. Please evolve species, increase level, or change class to progress further. Skill Savant title has activated. Stat limit increased. Name, Sylas Grimblade. Species, Human F. Affiliation, Grimblade lineage. Level, 0. Titles: A Flexible Will, Skill Savant, FFF+, Madness Conqueror, FF, A Patient Stalker, F. Physical, 50. Strength, 50. Constitution, 50. Dexterity, 50. Speed, 50. Mental, 53. Intelligence, 23. Wisdom, 14. Charisma, 122. Will, 116. Luck, 1. Skills: Madness Control, FF+, Basic Scouting, F, Madden Enlightenment, FF+. Comprehensions: Madness, FFF. Gene State, Soft. Fragmented Genes, Grimblade Lineage, F, 8, Dexterity, F, 6, Constitution, F, 4, Strength, F. Common Genes, 3, Speed, F, 4, Strength, F, 3, Constitution, F, 3, Dexterity, F, 3, Intelligence, F, 1, Wisdom, F, 1, Will, F. Gene Talents: Blade, Aura, Unranked, Sudden Burst, F, Tail Whip, F. Sylas took deep breaths, slowly recovering from his splitting headache. When he could finally see again, he felt that his mind was even sharper than it had been before, but he could only sigh. It seemed that this was the reason mental was so often treated as a single stat, even deciding whether you could scan others or not. It seemed that its limit wasn't in individual stats, but rather the overall stat. This was probably also the result of the Grimblade lineage, increasing his stat limit as well. It was highly disappointing, but there did seem to be a silver lining. I was wondering what titles were. If this is the case, then titles should also be a method of evolving your species in a way. It was applied after the gene boost, so my base intelligence moved from 5 to 14, and that capped my mental at 50. But then Skill Savant activated and my intelligence doubled, causing the stat limit to be raised as well. But if this is the case, I won't get another chance like that again. Even so, that's something that I can take advantage of in the future. Sylas immediately took stock of his titles again and noticed many things. He had managed to absorb all 3 intelligence genes, because Skill Savant didn't just give him plus 100% intelligence, but it also gave him a plus 50% chance of absorbing related genes. And due to Madness Conqueror, he had a permanent plus 10% success rate in collecting all genes. So, aside from intelligence, he actually had a 60% chance on everything else. He took stock of his titles again, as though he was seeing them all for the first time again. He wanted to make sure that there weren't any loopholes he missed. When he finally pulled his mind away, he found another silver lining. He had been wondering why Will wasn't incorporated with the other mental stats. It seemed to fit in with them perfectly. Could the reason why be purely because it wasn't subject to stat limits? Sylas really hoped that this was true. He had entered this world gung-ho. He even remembered being pissed off by the fact Will even had a stat of its own. How could you even measure that? But now he was just hopeful that he wouldn't be limited. This world's already whittling me down, huh? Sylas looked up toward the skies, his green eyes flickering with a depth of calmness. Deep within, there was a flame burning. These limits, he really wanted to break them all. He stood, moving forward and pressing a hand on Jared. He hadn't seen the man's stats before he died, so he was a bit curious. Jared Cooper. Gene detected. Common gene. 3 speed, F. 2 dexterity, F. 4 intelligence, F. 3 charisma, F. 1 will, F. Attempt assimilation? Yes, no. They were brothers. The thought caused Sylas' eyes to dim a bit. The odds that they would share the same last name and not be related felt slim. They were lucky to find each other in this trial, and yet unlucky in the end anyway. Sylas gave all the genes over to the gene crystal. The one will gene ended up being wasted, but it was quickly absorbed by the madness key. Just in time, too, since it was just about for its hunger to kick in again. Now, there were only 2 days left before the feeding requirements increased. Other than Max and Jared's genes, Sylas also gained their remaining coins. Coins, 3185F. It's time to return. Sylas reached Castle Main in the dead of night. It was both the furthest it could be from dusk and dawn. Quest Plight of Castle Main, Bronze, completed. Clearance level, Bronze. Rewards, Bronze Mastery Crystal, Bronze Nexus Ticket, Oh, bronze mastery crystal, treasure. Absorb to instantly raise any skill or comprehension to the bronze mastery level. There's only one thing that Sylas would use this on, and that would obviously be his madness comprehension. It was his strongest ace and the core of his strength right now. Although he felt that raising Madden Enlightenment, right from fragmented to bronze, was enticing, it still wasn't the best use of his resources. In fact, raising madness could have a positive impact on it as well. I'll have to find a safe region to do it. Every time my madness progresses, I enter that contemplative state, and I'm pretty sure my madness uncontrollably leaks as well. It also doesn't help that there's potentially a spy here. Sylas checked in with a militiaman on duty and entered the village. Things had mostly settled down, but he hadn't been gone for more than an hour to begin with. Sylas checked in with a militiaman on duty and entered the village. Things had mostly settled down, but he hadn't been. Torches lit the paths, and people cobbled together some semblance of peace so that they could rest for the night and work again come the morning. Soon, he had made it to Kasari's shack, and he knocked. A groggy voice that was trying its very best to not sound groggy came from the other side. "Come in." Sylas opened the door and realized that it was just Kasari. Olivia had likely already gone to bed, as had the other adventurers. Kasari, who was probably the most tired of them all, had to keep up appearances by, at the very least, napping on her desk. "I come bearing gifts," Sylas said, a light smile tugging his lips. Kasari rested her chin on her desk, looking up at him. She was much too lazy to raise her head any further, but her eyes did light up a bit at the words. Sylas took out the den, class steel, and city steel. "Holy shit," she mumbled. "I was wondering why the quest reward I got made this a bronze quest. I've never even seen one before, but this is probably why. Can you use them?" Kasari sat up so that she could talk easier. "The class steel is huge, and it's probably a method of controlling the rotten wolves, too. The problem is the villagers. They're much like normal people. No, maybe they're normal people. They're not just NPCs, they have their own biases and everything. If a normal village like mine starts using zombies, well, public perception would plummet." Sylas nodded. But I can use this stuff to upgrade the Nexus. With them, we could probably unlock F+ materials, maybe even FF. They're so valuable. And with the city steel, there's a chance we can upgrade from a rudimentary village to a village and build some real walls, finally. That's good. Then I should probably also tell you that I was attacked. "By beasts?" Kasari asked, already frowning. "People." Her frown deepened, not liking the implication. This quest had called up everyone in a 100-kilometer radius. Of course, it was possible to just directly ignore, but then you wouldn't get any details, nor would you get the compass leading here. There was also a penalty involved for accepting and then flaking in the end, though this penalty wasn't worth your life. You think it's one of them? I don't know. It could be a coincidence. They could have gotten the information through other means or any number of things. There's definitely the possibility that there were some who ignored the quest that could use where it pinged them as a clue for which areas to check on. You said it was 100 kilometers, right? That's quite a large area, but it's not impossible given the strength of those people. How strong were they? Level 4. F-level threats. 2 of them. As he spoke, he took out their equipment and placed them down. They were useless to him as well, so he might as well pass them on to Kasari as well. Kasari took a breath and exhaled slowly. She took a moment to gather herself before she spoke. "You really don't need to give me these, you know? Don't treat me like that same little girl. I have a little strength of my own, you know?" There was a hint of irritation in her voice, but Sylas knew it wasn't really aimed at him. "If you have a method of trading them in, do so," Sylas said. "I'm not giving them to you out of pity. I just quite literally can't use them." Kasari's frown returned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Sylas held up his hands. "I can't take these off. They're bound to me. I can't unequip them, and while they're in my possession, I can wear any armor or wield any weapons." Her eyes widened. "No way. I've never heard of something like that. Is it a really powerful item, then?" Sylas blew out a breath and shook his head. He wished. "It just gives plus 10% constitution and only on my fists. I'm not even sure it would apply if I used a palm attack or something like that. Kasari fell into her thoughts. Plus 10% constitution felt weak, but if it was a permanent stat boost like it seemed, it could very quickly roll into something much more substantial. Now that she thought about it, she had never seen a treasure item give a percentage boost at all. The only reason Sylas brushed it off was because he had two methods that gave him far better and far more permanent stat boost. So many of his titles gave better boosts, while his comprehension current gave plus 150% and plus 200% boost to respective stats. It was hard for him to take plus 10% seriously, especially since it was just to a single stat. I don't know what you've gotten yourself into, but that's kind of gross. Kasari looked at the blood-soaked wraps in mock horror. Sylas shook his head. That was a gripe he had as well. But at the very least, it wasn't itchy, and it didn't seem to give off any foul smells. Oddly enough, it felt self-cleaning as well. He had gotten it soaked in much more blood than this over time, but it seemed to revert back to this condition every time. Kasari stood to her feet and rounded her desk. "Come, watch this," she said with a grin. "You sure you want to advance your village right now? I think you should make a spectacle of it." Kasari rolled her eyes. It wasn't much of a surprise if he guessed what was going to happen before she did it. "You're no fun, but now that you say so, you're probably right. This leader stuff just isn't for me." "I don't think so." Kasari looked over, about to say something quippy, when she realized she had misconstrued his words. He didn't mean to agree with her. He meant the opposite. "Your temper is a bit of a problem." "Excuse me, but you have a very good feel for people. You can come off as very endearing to many. And from what I see, your spawn villagers don't have any ingrained biases as women leading, so you're in a good position. If you took the role of warlord, you do very well. Appoint others to do administrative stuff if you don't want to deal with it and lead the people's spirit, not their minds. You're rank number 1 right now, for a reason, no? How can you make such nice stuff sound so annoying at the same time?" Sylas smiled. "Good night, Kasari. Get some rest." Kasari watched Sylas walk away, huffing out a sigh. "I guess he's right. After this upgrade, instead of a professional, I'll try for an administrative type spawn instead and hope I get something good." She looked at her luck stat. Hopefully, it would come through again. The center of the village was filled with hustle and bustle, but it wasn't unruly. It felt quite warm and homelike, filled with hope and expectations for the future. After surviving such an encounter, many of the villagers were in high spirits. They looked no different from normal people. Everything from their skin tone to mannerisms perfectly mirrored the people of Earth. They even spoke the same language. The only thing that stood out was the fact they were all around the same age, somewhere between their 20s and early 30s. There were no children around, and there only seemed to be tentative relationships between the people. Although there were some who no doubt shared a bed at night, none of them were husband and wife. Sylas took silent note of all of this, but he didn't say much. He knew that Kasari wasn't a fool. Administrative stuff might annoy her, but she really understood people. At the same time, her education was just as good as his own. They had attended the same schools, after all. "Thank you for gathering, everyone. This is a momentous occasion for us all, and I wanted you all to be here to witness it." Kasari stood on a makeshift podium, probably one she had gotten the militiamen to put together casually. To her side, and a step back, there stood Olivia, while before her and down on the ground before the podium, there was a line of militiamen. Although the scene was a bit shabby, it got the point across and raised her prestige in their eyes. Kasari could practically feel the popularity rising. Today, we will move forward, leaving behind the dregs of the rudimentary village rank, and move to the stage of a true village. The security, our number of helping hands, and our quality of life will all increase. Kasari waved a hand, and there was a flash of light that cabin from the cabin behind her. The people gasped in awe as a ripple of light spread through the surroundings. In the distance, the weak suburban fences became more substantial, replaced by a wall of thick logs even larger than the Knoll village had had. The tents in the surroundings became shacks more like the one Kasari lived in, while Kasari's shack became larger, taking the shape of a minimalistic cabin. The village itself became larger as well. If before it had been around 50 meters in diameter, now it was double that and nearly took up the whole marsh. There was a lot of empty space created by this change, but the happiness in the eyes of the villagers couldn't be shaken. In fact, even Maya looked quite content as her abode got a substantial upgrade. Of course, those complete bee skins also had a large part to play in it. Kasari smiled. I would also like to introduce you all to a new addition to our village, a man that we will rely upon heavily from now on. With a click, a man who seemed to be in his late 30s walked out of Kasari's cabin. Compared to the villagers who all wore linen clothes, he seemed to be dressed more nobly. It was an odd feeling considering the fact his dress was much the same, just a simple linen shirt and pants. But the way he carried himself easily attracted a great deal of attention. Sylas narrowed his eyes. He could feel that this man's charisma was very high, but it manifested in a weird way. Sylas definitely didn't have this sort of magnetism when he just appeared. This feels similar to that feeling the Knoll head was giving off. It's like a comprehension, but not at the same time. So, it's a class. Gregory Chambers, F+. Level, 0. Profession, steward common. Favorability. Sylas couldn't see the favorability. That was likely something that only Kasari could. I see. It's likely that a class, or a profession in this case, doesn't just improve certain stats. I don't believe this man spawned with higher charisma than me, though it's potentially possible. It seems that a class modified how a stat works, or maybe changes its effectiveness. Everything he learned about these systems, their stats, and how they worked made it all so much more complicated. He could almost understand why they had just given them a stripped-down version of the system. Soon, the ceremony was almost over, and Kasari looked toward the quest takers and Sylas. We aren't quite finished with introductions quite yet. Everyone, please allow me to introduce the heroes of last night's battle. They will be joining us from today onward and become solidified members of our family. Cheers broke out, and the small excursion drew to a close. Afterward, Kasari invited the quest taker, Olivia, and the newly minted Gregory into her cabin. Gregory, just listen in for now. I want you to understand the layout of the village for a while longer before you start making suggestions. Not a problem, City Lord, he bowed. Kasari nodded and looked back toward the others. I will be blunt. Sylas and I do have a relationship that goes a long way back, but we have not seen each other in almost 10 years. Our meeting was purely a coincidence, and I sent him on a mission yesterday because he was the only one fit to go. You all should have received your quest rewards already, and I have the spoils of the battle here. There were 10 Knoll corpses and 10 rotten wolves, including the evolved one. As you all probably know, the rotten wolves are useless to us. The genes are corrupted, so we can set them aside for now. Of the 10 remaining corpses, there's the Knoll head, and there is one other elite Knoll. Technically speaking, Sylas and his methods killed almost all of them, so he is entitled to the majority. What you are all entitled to is a cut of what was found in the village, as it was thanks to our collective strength that they were dealt with. You all played a large part in allowing the village to upgrade to a new stage, so I'm willing to compensate you for your efforts. First, I will give you all your own individual homes. You won't have to share bunk beds any longer. It will all be paid from my own dime. Second, the armor I am wearing now. I will have one commission for each of you. Kasari displayed the stats of her armor for everyone to see, and their eyes couldn't help but open wide. Why were the stats so exaggerated? Third, so long as you need anything and have the funds to pay for it, I will be able to trade for it for you, so long as it is at the F- level. Wow, Dom, City Lord, that's crazy. Alex recovered quickly, covering his early slip-up with enthusiasm. Morgan shook his head, and Lauren covered her mouth, holding back her laughter. These rewards are excellent, Morgan said, helping Alex out a bit so that Kasari didn't have the time to figure out what the latter had really wanted to say. I have no objections. None here, Alex seconded. None here as well, Lauren confirmed. Good, Kasari nodded. In that case, we can talk about more of what we expect out of this cooperation. But first, she smiled and held out her hand, shaking each one of theirs one by one. There was a bit of a lull, and Sylas could tell that they were checking their new affiliations, so he pretended to do the same. This change was a protection for both parties. Now that they were under Castlemaine, Kasari was beholden to them to an extent. At the same time, there was no easy way to get rid of an affiliation one had won. That was a conundrum that Sylas himself was in right now. And Kasari should be able to see all of their stat windows as well as their favorability. It could be said that it was a two-way relationship, one slightly skewed in Kasari's favor, which was also why Sylas took note of the fact they had all accepted it so easily. If there was a spy amongst them, he would have expected for one of them to escape in the night, or something to that effect. But everyone was still here, obvious. It seemed that what happened last night was deeper than what it appeared to be. And worse than that, whoever remained was likely supremely confident in their abilities, even after watching his feats. We'll see, Sylas thought. Not long afterward, Sylas found himself in the small shack promised to him by Kasari. It was small, but it was cozy. It's no wonder she was so stingy with her funds. I wonder how many coins she had to spend to get all of this up and running. Sylas only had a vague idea about how cities worked, but there seemed to be a ton to balance. Even the talents she spawned would only start with a slight favorable impression of her. If she didn't perform well, they could easily turn on her. This was why Sylas had noted the existence of Gregory. Compared to Maya, even though Gregory was of lesser talent, he was far more dangerous. Maya was pretty widely unliked, but if Kasari slipped up with her relationship with Gregory, then she might soon find her entire village turned against her. There was another reason Sylas was so put off by Gregory's appearance as well. It wasn't exactly his existence, per se, but rather how he existed at all. This system was creating all of these people, but was it from scratch? Were they essentially newborns? Or could it be that they were from other worlds? Could the system fast-track maturity and even select people's personalities? Whatever the true answer was, it was definitely an uncomfortable one. It was all so eerie, and Sylas sighed, closing his eyes. Where do the beings spawned by the system for cities come from? There was a wild glitch, flashing with cracked lines and twisted space in Sylas' vision. Sylas' eyes snapped opened, and he looked toward the madness key, a hint of dread forming between his brows. Question has touched upon a taboo. Glutton curse activated. Hunger has increased. Madness key, treasure, a key leading to a fortune of madness. Detects other madness disciples and enlightens your path. Contains small spatial world within. Can answer one question in exchange for 5 fragmented gene. Curse status, glutton. 5 common genes a day to maintain happiness. Requirements grow by the day. Less than 7 days, remaining until hunger increases. Curse status, cannot be unequipped. Sylas could feel the madness key suddenly quaking. He didn't want to find out what would happen when it reached a peak. With swift thoughts, he pulled out one of the normal Knoll corpses and fed it to Madness Key. Only then did it calm down. Each one of these normal Knolls had 6 common genes apiece, so he had ended up wasting one. But there wasn't much he could do about that, anyway. This time, it didn't even answer the question, so the question doesn't necessarily have to be about madness to elicit this response. Sylas' brows tightened into a frown. He didn't like this at all. What was taboo about the question he had just asked? It felt taboo, but that was only from his perspective. Ostensibly, this spawning of humans from scratch should be common and uninteresting to the system. This entire world was formed of spawned creatures in this way, and humans were just another of these creatures. The only reason Sylas could think of for this to be a taboo subject was if there was something that went beyond what was clearly observable going on here. Summoned Ascension. For there to be a system in place, it has to mean that someone or something created it. Even if it's just some unknown law of physics that humans as a whole have yet to come into contact with, at least not until now. What remains certain is that others must have benefited from it and interacted with it. Assuming that Earth wasn't the first world to receive this opportunity, and also assuming that there are others that have not only received it, but succeeded where we failed. How would these worlds feel about the addition of new worlds to their system? Would they greet it with open arms? Would they want to use us as slaves? Maybe as soldiers in their wars? Would they be akin to a benevolent god? looking out for our best interests? What if this system is under the control of someone else? In that case, is it even possible to rely on it to match or even surpass such a person? The thoughts came in an avalanche, and by the end of it, Sylas was certain of only one thing. They had to be more cautious of these spawned humans. There were many thoughts going on in Sylas' mind, but ultimately, he knew many of these things weren't under his control. Even so, as he brought out the corpse of the Null Elite, his mind was fluttering with a thought. Genes seem to be the foundation of everything. If this system ends up being a shackle, then I will just need to figure out a way to collect them and use them without the system as a bridge. Threshak, gene detected. Common gene. 2 intelligence, F. 3 wisdom, F. Attempt assimilation, yes, no. Sylas passed it all to the gene crystal. He could feel himself inching closer to unlocking it. Basic ether flow. Ether comes naturally to you, even when it's outside of your body. Your ability to extend your ether away from your core, attaching it to objects to control and wield, far exceeds others. +5 intelligence, +5 charisma, fragmented. +10 intelligence, +10 charisma, common. +20 intelligence, +20 charisma, bronze. Requirements to unlock, bronze. 2 speed, wisdom. 3 dexterity. 7 charisma. 6 intelligence. Maximilian and Jared both had far more genes than the Knolls. I wonder why that is. Though Sylas wondered, he didn't dare to ask the Madness Key. The Knolls were spawns of the system. Who knew if he would touch on another taboo? The spike was already far worse than he expected. After another 7 days, he would be spending all his time hunting to feed the thing instead of improving himself. Then again, with all these gene and stat limits, at least he was making use of all those excess genes somehow. +30 coins, F. This time there was no bone axe, so Sylas moved on. He ignored the normal Knolls because with the new insatiable requirements of the Madness Key, he would definitely be needing them. Plus, the stats they provided, strength and constitution, the gene crystal didn't need anymore. Zurog, gene detected. Common gene. 2 intelligence, F. 2 wisdom, F. 2 charisma, F. 2 will, F. Attempt assimilation, yes, no. Sylas passed them all over to the gene crystal again. Requirements to unlock, bronze. 2 speed. 3 dexterity. 4 intelligence. 5 charisma. The remaining 2 was absorbed by the Madness Key, but this time Sylas really observed the process. I lost 3 months of time because of this key, those glitches as well. It's possible that it exists outside the parameters of this system, at least in part. In that case, observing it might be a key to learning how to absorb genes without the input of the system. Sylas wasn't sure if gene and stat limits were artificially placed by the system or not, but if he could gain an inkling from observing the Madness Key, maybe he could find out. Unfortunately, he got nothing out of it. It was just a pulse of energy, and then it surged into it. He had no choice but to table the idea. +100 coins, F. The total brought his coins up to 3,315 coins. However, there was actually another item in the reward orb this time as well. Dungeon map, FF+. A scroll appeared in Sylas' hand, but when he tried to open it, nothing came of it. Map locked. Requirements not met. Sylas frowned and was forced to turn to the Madness Key. Only then did he learn what was going on. It seemed that the map wouldn't unlock until he actually entered the dungeon. However, with it, he could vaguely feel the general direction the dungeon was in as well. It might not be the best time to leave considering what happened before, but I doubt there'll ever be a best time. I'll also need to leave one way or another so that I can raise my madness to bronze mastery. Sylas made a decision and stood, but he immediately got hit by a wave of dizziness. He had pushed himself very hard the previous day, having fought not just 1 or 2 battles, but effectively 4 of them, the third of which was extremely drawn out due to the waves of rotten wolves. It seemed he hadn't fully recovered. He had cut his sleep short because of the excursion to the Knoll village. I'll catch up on rest, then eat some of the animals I killed on the way there and back. Then I should be good to go. Sylas reigned in his eagerness, trumping his desires with a familiar discipline. Sliding onto his new hay mattress, he closed his eyes and drifted off. They're dead. Darius Blackwood was a man who could be considered quite calm most of the time. But news that 2 of his level 4s didn't return was like a knife stabbing into his heart and twisting. Those 2 were firmly within the top 5 of his group, and they were 4 and 5 either. Are you sure they haven't defected, City Lord? Benjamin Cross, FF. Level 5. Profession, Steward Common. Favorability, 8 out of 10. No, I would have seen it happen. It's possible. There are many methods of deceiving the eyes. Darius nodded, agreeing with Benjamin's sentiment. I agree. That's why I never trust this bullshit system with anything. How can it read a person's heart or assign a value to a person's will? I prefer to look someone in the eye, and Max and Jared were 2 trustworthy men. They wouldn't run off with the treasures alone. Darius took a breath and exhaled. He stood from his desk and moved to the city steel, checking something in the Nexus before pulling back. Castle Maine has progressed to the status of an official village. He let the words hang in the air as he paced. Sylas could only see the name of the cities, but Darius could see far more, and this confirmed exactly what his speculations were. Something has changed, Darius thought aloud. The city leaderboard is based purely on the progression of the city, not the strength of the city. I thought Castle Maine put too much emphasis on pushing up their city's level and not enough on nurturing its warriors, so I wasn't worried. But if they're able to not only deal with the 25 gnolls and still have enough strength to kill both Max and Jared, they're more of a problem than I originally thought. And if they have someone with an advanced scouting skill, which they almost certainly do, they'll know it was us, the Enclave, that attacked. City leaderboard. 3. The Enclave, Grade 7, Rudimentary Village. What do you suggest, Benjamin? Darius looked up and met his steward's eyes. We have lost 2 powerful warriors, City Lord, but we still have the advantage of the informant. Couldn't they have died already? They'll certainly speculate that there's a spy. Yes, but you know as well as I how well they are able to hide themselves. Would they still work with us? Therein lies the potential problem, Benjamin nodded. The informant isn't one of our own. They just believed that it was more worthwhile to take a gamble on us as opposed to Castle Maine. I do not believe that the informant, given their abilities, would make a mistake. In that case, whatever circumstances led to the death of Max and Jared should be outside the expectations of the informant as well. Meaning, we wait, Benjamin said. If the informant contacts us within the day, it means that they believe that we are still the better bet despite the changes. If not, then we will need to pivot. We are still unaware of the informant's origins. It's possible that they could be from another city and attempting to use a borrowed knife to clear away some of their enemies. Castle Maine is a decent distance from us. It took 3 days' travel for Max and Jared to make it to the Knoll village. Though most of that was due to the danger of the beasts in the region, that will be to our advantage. Even if the informant chooses Castle Maine, the impact on us won't be felt immediately. There's no need for us to waste time shoring up defenses or things of the like. We were already given an extremely advantageous starting locale. Instead, I think we should make a push toward bolstering our professions. Like Castle Maine. Yes, the informant alluded to the fact Castle Maine was leagues ahead of us in terms of armory. We need to change that. For the Grade 8, Grade 9, and Village upgrade, I suggest focusing it all on profession spawns. We have an advantage that others do not. We need very little defenses, so we can send out far more warriors to collect resources. This will be our advantage. In fact, whether the informant contacts us again or not, I believe that this is the path forward. The fact they have taken so long already means that they are wavering. Such an ally is not one we should rely on. Darius agreed with a nod. This will still put a huge strain on our coins. Gather everyone for a meeting. We won't break the news to them immediately. We'll wait until next week for that. Sylas rushed through the forest. He had made his departure clear, but honestly, he wasn't exactly sure of how long he would be gone. He only got a vague sensation of direction from a map, and for all he knew, it could be halfway across the world. Honestly, though, even if it took him months, from what he had come to understand about this current world, An FF plus dungeon was too great to pass up. He wasn't sure of the ranking for the Slithering Madness dungeon, but it was no doubt the reason for his success today. Despite losing 3 months of time, he could easily keep up with those around him, and that meant a great deal. Plus, Kasari wasn't a child who needed her hand held, as much as he seemed eager to clear the path for her. She had survived 3 months without him, and she could survive another 3 again. Soon, though, the first day waned. Venturing deeper and deeper into the forest, Sylas found that the creatures were becoming more dangerous. Although he had still yet to meet a level 1, the standard was rising to an astonishing degree. He hadn't realized just how shallow a depth he had been in, but as he waded deeper into these murky waters, it became clearer and clearer. Luckily, he had traded for something quite important before leaving. Basic Night Vision F. Requirement 10 Mental. Use this skill to illuminate the darkness around you. That wasn't the only thing he had gained, either. Common Arts Enthusiast F. You are a jack of all, master of none. However, your efforts have given your style of combat a unique flair and an air of unpredictability that strikes fear in your enemies. +1 Dexterity, plus 10% success in absorbing related genes. He had managed to claim the full title, and his dexterity had actually risen to 51, and no small cost of pain and misery. It seemed that the pain was even worse when you were at your stat limit. Eating these animals really does keep me awake, though. I can't tell if it's more like coffee and I'm harming myself, or if this influx of ether can really replace sleep. After gathering up so many beasts after a day's work, Sylas could more than afford to ask the madness key. So he did so, using common genes instead of fragmented ones. Can eating ether-infused meat replace sleep? Digested ether gives the body a sense of freedom and lightness similar to a night's rest, but it cannot do the same for the mind. Extended periods of time without sleep, unless one is an ascended being, can be very detrimental to progress. Sylas noted this. It couldn't replace sleep, but it seemed there was another benefit he had neglected: healing. It couldn't help his mind recover, but it certainly could help his body too. This meat would be important for keeping himself in tip-top shape. Deep in the night, Sylas set up another item he bought. Basic Enclosure F. This treasure is a must for solo adventurers. Set up a parameter of detection and sleep with peace of minding. The item was a sleeping bag with many hidden bells and whistles. It could be hung from a tree or placed directly on the ground. At the same time, it could alert the user to any movement within 10 meters. This felt like too short a distance, but honestly, Sylas wasn't sure he wanted a large radius than this. The forest was filled with creatures. If he was alerted to everything within even 25 meters, he would never get any rest. He strapped himself to a thick branch after climbing about 5 meters up a tree and then slept the night away. When he awoke, he sprung into action again. By this point in his journey, his gene crystal had already shored up all the missing physical genes it needed. There were only 4 intelligence and 5 charisma genes remaining for him to succeed. Unfortunately, none of the beasts he came across gave mental genes. He was having a feeling that he might need to go and kill more humanoid species if he wanted to finally unlock basic etherflow and raise his stat limit to 100. Sylas' steps came to a stop and his head jerked backward. A spurt of green liquid collided with a tree by his right shoulder, rebounding back somewhat and drizzling down a moment later. Sylas frowned. That green looked almost identical to the green of Lurk's crossbow bolts. Was it a coincidence? He suddenly put 2 and 2 together. The dungeon is close. He had wondered where Lurk could have possibly gotten such potent poison from. But what if Zurag had already found the dungeon before, but couldn't venture in because there were too many creatures surrounding it? That would explain where Lurk had gotten the poison and the dungeon all at once. Soon, Sylas was proven right, though in this case, he had hoped that he was very wrong. The entire dungeon region was surrounded by a species of paralysis venom-spitting cobras. Spitting Cobra F. Level 1. Physical, 32. Mental, 49. Will, 23. Sylas snatched the spitting cobra before it could spit again clamping down on its head hard. He had a lot of experience wrangling snakes, and though this one had a high mental, its physical was astoundingly weak compared to the current Sylas. After killing it and checking its genes, he felt like he understood why. Spitting cobra. Gene detected. Common gene. 2. Intelligence F. Attempt assimilation? Yes, no. This was the first time Sylas had seen a beast that gave a mental gene, but what was more important than that was that this was clearly the spitting cobra's strength. The paralysis venom they spit must be powered by ether somehow. Or would it count as poison now? The spitting cobra species back on Earth can't do harm through its spitting action unless it lands on your eyes. Really, so it should count as venom. But transferring my knowledge from Earth to this situation could land me in danger, like it almost did in the Slithering Madness dungeon. The distinction was mostly meaningless for now, but Sylas was the type to want to understand more about the world around him. Sylas gave the 2 genes over to the gene crystal. Now, he only needed 2 intelligence genes and 5 charisma genes, and considering the current situation, he had a feeling that he would get those 2 intelligence genes quite quickly. Even without moving from his location, he could see the telltale markings of a spitting cobra's. He could make out several burrows, not to mention dung that was congruent with Sylas studies for reptilians of the like. This seems to only be the edge of the territory. Sylas could hear running water up ahead. At some unknown point, he had run back into the river this area shared. This made sense to him, as spitting cobras love the water. However, he could also feel a thick stream of ether in the air as well. Even without taking out the dungeon map, he could sense it. Ever since he had evolved Madden Meditation to Madden Enlightenment, he had gained a subtle sixth sense of sorts. It couldn't quite see, but it could feel, almost akin to the feeling one would get when you felt someone was looking at you. Toward ether, though, this sense was much stronger than. It flowed like smoke through the air in Sylas' eyes, and a sight that he could usually only see at night was slowly forming before him the more he focused on it. The dungeon was definitely up ahead. Not far, just 200 to 300 meters. However, there was a minefield of spitting cobras between himself and that goal. Sylas narrowed his eyes, his gaze shifting to the venom that was still drizzling down the tree trunk to his side. He brought out a dagger and controlled it with his telekinesis. Then, carefully, he scooped up some of this venom and balanced it on the blade. It's not ideal, but it'll work. Let's go test this out. Sylas ended up experimenting for about an hour, catching several spitting cobras in the process. In conclusion, the venom, indeed, works like venom. So long as it doesn't get into my eyes, it hitting my skin is not a problem. However, even the slightest nick leads to paralysis. It doesn't seem to lead to death anymore due to some odd mutation, but even so, if you're stuck frozen in the middle of battle, you're as good as dead. The higher the mental of the spitting cobra, the more potent the venom is, and there are some creatures that can shrug off the paralysis in a few fractions of a second, so long as their physical and mental is at a certain level. If I had to assume, I would say the stats that played the largest role were constitution and intelligence. This was positive for Sylas. At the very least, he didn't have to worry about having a perfect streak of dodges. He could slip up so long as the venom didn't get into his eyes, and to be on the safer side, he should just avoid all orifices in general. There's just one more thing I want to practice. Spitting Cobra F. Level 1. Physical, 33. Mental, 47. Will, 22. Sylas didn't immediately rush the snake, circling the gray and black scaled creature. Then it came. A spurt of green that moved with a swiftness that must have been at least 50 speed. Sylas didn't panic. Reacting to 50 speed wasn't an issue for him. His will swelled up, and his charisma pressed it down onto the world. And at that moment, the line of venom froze in the air. Success. Sylas flicked it back at the snake. This obviously wasn't going to harm it, as it was definitely immune to its own venom. Instead, it was just to prove to himself that he could do it. The venom moved back. Without madness activated, his telekinesis could only display around 30 speed, so the snake was actually able to dodge. However, Sylas followed up with a swift kick that sent it spiraling to the side. He rushed after it before it could gather itself and grabbed a hold of its neck, squeezing down hard. Sylas' telekinesis worked best on items that were exceptionally light. However, even light objects could be hard to control depending on their speed. For example, Jared's arrows were far beyond his ability to control with his telekinesis. However, as he had expected, this venom seemed to be in a sweet spot. It was fast, but it was also so light, and its weight was so spread out that he could take control of it. That would only benefit him. Who knew? Maybe in the future, when his telekinesis increased in strength, even stopping arrows wouldn't be impossible. A dagger flashed out from the madness key and severed its head. Sylas threw the snake into a separate storage device, a new one that he had bought with his funds. The space of the madness key was great, but the problem was that anything with genes that he tossed in there would be swallowed up. The good news was that aside from the rotten wolves, it would leave the other corpses behind, so he could at least store large amounts of food. But it was very inconvenient to lose out on certain genes. This sort of intelligence gene haul was rare, and he couldn't let the madness key act as it pleased, especially when absorbing these genes didn't allow him to post-date the next curse activation. Sylas brought out a bottle of water, another treasure that stored far more liquid than it seemed to. This one bottle could produce 5 liters of water naturally in a 24-hour period. It could store up to 20, but it had the size of a normal half-liter bottle of water. He took a long drink, then had some lunch. After he felt he was sufficiently rested, he turned his attention to the dungeon again. Sylas burst out into a sprint. His actions immediately caused a response. Several spitting cobras rushed out from the burrows or slithered out from the river to the side, the air suddenly becoming filled with streaks of green. He had thought about taking a slower, more methodical approach, but the ending of that choice was obvious. He'd find himself surrounded and fighting a prolonged battle. By the time he made it to the dungeon, he wouldn't even have the strength left to deal with whatever danger it had available. He weaved in and out of the rain of venom. Suddenly, a cobra fell out of the tree, appearing just above his head with its maw opened wide. Sylas didn't even look at it, a dagger flashing out from his madness key and slicing it in two just as madness activated. Shrieks filled the forest floor, and the snakes entered a frenzy. They seemed to forget that Sylas was a common enemy, and venom flew in all directions. Sylas put a dagger away and misdirected a spurt of venom that came from his side. With a leap, he shot over a dead and fallen tree trunk, his palm rebounding off of it for just a split moment before he hit the ground on the other side. Big. A cobra that was almost 5 meters long appeared. No, it was more than one. Sylas had known that the closer he got to the dungeon, the more powerful these creatures would get. But he didn't expect to see a spitting cobra that put even a king cobra to shame in size. Spitting cobra F+. Level 3. Physical 47. Mental 62. Will 37. The cobras rose up, their hoods flaring as they hissed. Then, their venom shot out like a rain of arrows. Sylas didn't try to control fully, nor did he try to reverse their directions. Instead, he simply misdirected them. He kept charging forward with his greatest speed. His mind visualized the area around him, locking onto the flying venom and only changing their direction slightly. At their speed, just the slightest deviation sent them flying way off the mark, shooting over Sylas' head and far wide of his body. An F+ cobra snapped at him, but Sylas' dagger appeared once more, driving right into its mouth so hard that it pinned the snake to a nearby tree. Sylas didn't even try to pull the dagger back, dodging through a group of behemoth-sized cobras and shooting into the distance. They were hot on his trail, and their physicals weren't nearly as weak as the snakes in the outer ring. But by now, Sylas had already laid an eye on the dungeon. Basilisk's Reign, FF+. Level maximum, 5. Entry limit, 3. Recommended, 75 physical, mental 60, will 50. Description: the King of Snakes is undisputed, regal in their temperament and unopposed in their might. Those who dare step into their domain will show respect or pay for it in kind. Sylas quickly read it. Despite his situation, he wouldn't rashly jump into a dungeon without understanding what it was all about. The description didn't tell him much, but the recommendations at least told him that it wasn't too far out of his league. If he stupidly jumped into a level 10 dungeon or something even worse, it would be too late to regret it. He hopped into the Slithering Madness dungeon only because he felt he had no other choice. He wasn't in such desperate straits this time around. However, the entry limit wasn't a line he had seen before. The Slithering Madness dungeon had not had it. Sylas' eyes flickered down. These beasts. Spitting Cobra, FF. Level 3. Physical, 64. Mental, 74. Will, 49. Sylas' pace didn't slow down. He had already expected that since the gnolls hadn't taken full advantage of this region, there would have to be something even Zurog couldn't easily handle, and this creature more than fit the bill. It must have been at least 7 meters long, and though it wasn't as large as Big Madness, when it peeked up from its nap and flared out its hood, its intimidation factor was on a whole other level. A hiss that pierced Sylas' ears echoed. Sylas felt his steps slow down and his blood run cold. It wasn't out of fear, but something deeper than that. A skill. The cobras that were rushing after Sylas no longer dared to get closer, their bodies directly frozen in place. Sylas' will, though, seemed to be unearthed and shrugged it off. The FF, Spitting Cobra, seemed to be enraged by this and charged, a line of venom shooting out from its maw. Fast. It was incredibly so, and Sylas was running right toward it, making it even worse. He pushed with his telekinesis, pushing the venom upward as he rolled forward. He did his best to maintain his momentum, but this also meant that the cobra was suddenly right before him, moving with such speed that by the time he jumped to his feet, it was already bearing down on him. A dagger flew out from Sylas, headed right for the cobra that was slithering right toward him. The cobra was faster. Sylas sensed ether moving, and an invisible wall formed around it, almost like it had solidified the air in an area. The speed of Sylas' blade plummeted, and it felt like it had gained 10 times the weight instantly. The mental of the cobra displayed itself, and it opened its maw again, spitting out a line of venom that was even faster than before. Not only was it faster, the venom was an even brighter shade of green, and the distance was closer. It felt like a far more substantial attack, almost like the venom had become an arrow itself. Sylas tried to control it with his telekinesis, but it seemed rebuffed by something. Ether? Intelligence? Wisdom, maybe? Sylas realized right then that there were more ways to rebuff his telekinesis than just wait. It was just unfortunate he learned in this situation. Even so, he didn't panic. Sudden burst. He exploded to the side, then accelerated forward. He closed in the distance between himself and the cobra, his fist shooting out in a coat of blade aura. Now that he had Madden Enlightenment, he didn't have to choose between using his other abilities and blade aura. He could use them all at the same time. And keeping in line with that, he activated Madness Control at the same time. His fist slammed into the body of the cobra. Its head loomed above his own, but it didn't faze him in the slightest. He could feel the wall of solid air trying to slow him down, but he ripped right through it. It seemed that the skill wasn't too different from his own telekinesis. Against something of more substantial weight, it struggled. The cobra reeled back, the momentum of Sylas' strikes causing its body to curl and its head to snap downward. Sylas' body twisted as he entered a flow of battle state. His torso tensed and his leg whipped out with astonishing speed, coated by blade aura. Tail whip. Bang. The combination of 2 gene talents layered atop of one another resulted in a rain of blood and gore. Blade aura pushed his constitution to a level that could more than bear the power of his strikes, and he suffocated the cobra in a rain of skills and gene talents. He almost forgot about the dungeon for a moment. The other spitting cobras didn't dare to come close to their king's territory, and he took full advantage. He drove the cobra's head into the ground with the heel of an axe kick, and at the same time, a dagger ripped up through its throat in an uppercut motion, blazing forward with over 80 physical under the influence of his madness. Sylas huffed out a breath, his green irises blazing. A good battle, an excellent battle. He was starting to get addicted to this feeling. He quickly rushed down, not wanting to give the other spitting cobras the chance to catch up before he had time to take advantage. He had already lost out on one bundle of elite genes. He didn't want to face that again. Spitting cobra. Gene detected. Common gene. 6. Intelligence F. Attempt assimilation? Yes, no. Sylas threw it into his separate storage device. He had been hoping that it would have some charisma genes after that telekinesis-like skill, but it seemed he wasn't so lucky. But this creature was definitely a boon, nonetheless. He rushed toward the dungeon. Unlike slithering madness, this basilisk rain dungeon was carved into a tree. It looked like a swirling mass of opal embedded right into a willow. If Sylas had had the time, he would have liked to look at longer. This world was truly filled with fantastical things around every corner. Unfortunately, he didn't have the leisure. With a leap, Sylas vanished right into it. Sylas' vision cleared, finding himself standing on cool, gray stone and surrounded by similar walls. The region was circular, but there were 3 exits around him. They were formed by doors or gateways, but were instead just gaps in curved pieces of wall. Embedded into the cool, gray stone that made up the region, there were green veins that seemed carved of precious gems. These vein patterns seemed to be the only light source, and pulsed with a dull light that illuminated the surroundings. A maze? That was the best description. He seemed to be in a starting area of sorts, or he might even be right in the middle of it, and he had to choose one of the 3 exits to start his journey out of his dungeon. Then that must be what this is for. Sylas took out the dungeon map, and for the first time, it didn't resist him opening it up. Although he had some expectations for what he might see, what was actually there stunned him. It was much more detailed than he thought. I think I made an erroneous assumption. What is a dungeon map? A dungeon map is a treasure capable of leading one to a nearby dungeon, as well as detailing a comprehensive map of said dungeon upon entry. The higher the grade, the larger the range of detection and the stronger dungeon it can lead you to. Limited use item. Sylas understood. It wasn't that this treasure was specific to this dungeon, but rather that it would have always been able to find an FF plus ranked dungeon, so long as one was within its range of detection. In that case, this dungeon map was like a consumable, one-time use treasure. Then, this area is about as good as it's going to get for me. This region is protected by beasts that can't enter this dungeon, so there's no better time than right now to progress my madness. He looked around, and it didn't seem like there were any creatures that were going to suddenly pop out of nowhere. The chance seemed small enough that it was worth it. Bronze Mastery Crystal Treasure. Absorbed to instantly raise any skill or comprehension to the Bronze Mastery level. He held the bronze orb in his hands, rotating it between his fingers for a moment before sitting down in a comfortable position against a curved wall and crushing it. Sylas moved his intention toward his madness comprehension, subconsciously also pulling against the madness key, as well as he sunk into a state of meditation. Almost immediately, he felt that it was different from what he was used to. The first 2 times his madness had improved, first when he comprehended it in the first place, and second when he improved it to common mastery. He had lost himself to a runaway train of thought. But this time, he was so completely focused that it was the exact opposite of what he experienced during those times. He felt his mind sharpen, and he began to sense madness from an objective and scientific lens rather than the usual casual manner. It felt uncomfortable. It was like he was running counter to the nature of madness, and though his understanding was quickly deepening, it wasn't in the same way. Sylas realized something. I'm not going to be able to grasp Bronze Mastery like this. With quick thinking, he changed his approach. He used this new open and free mind not to try to reach a new level of mastery, but instead he tried to deepen his understanding of the mastery he already had. What was madness truly? How best should she use it? What was the best method of application? It seems to be about control of the body, or on a deeper level than that, control of the mind, the self. As Sylas moved along with this thought, he grappled with an understanding he had grasped somewhat, but not quite. Maddened enlightenment and madness control were extensions of his comprehension. Both of them had only been created off of his madness comprehension to begin with, which was why they tended to increase when his comprehension deepened. And soon, When he unlocked basic Etherflow, it too would be among that number. Oh, so it's like that. Sylas madness, which had already spread out wildly, slowly began to be reined in. Right now, I'm using my comprehension like a bludgeon, but it's by definition an enhancer. I'm supposed to use my comprehension to enhance, whether that be my battle style, a skill, or even a gene talent. It's akin to a universal amplifier. As Sylas reflected under the influence of the Mastery Crystal, while his comprehension didn't evolve, it did strengthen. His control over it tightened, and he began to sense its influence in other ways. When he used maddened enlightenment with madness fused into it, it was more than doubly effective. Your understanding of madness control has been temporarily raised by madness comprehension. Madness control has temporarily reached silver mastery. Your understanding of maddened enlightenment has been temporarily raised by madness comprehension. Maddened enlightenment has temporarily reached common mastery. Madness control, FF+, skill. Your body is your temple, and it listens to no commands other than your own. Plus 0.6, plus 0.3, effectiveness. After reaching bronze mastery, the boost to his effectiveness under madness control had been 0.3, but now it was 0.6 after temporarily reaching silver mastery. Maddened enlightenment didn't have as clear as a change, or more accurately, there was no easy stat to read associated with it. Sylas had a feeling that this was because basic scouting wasn't at a high enough level. It was similar to how, before he got basic scouting, the descriptor for madness control had only said plus dexterity, an arbitrary and nonsensical description. Seeing this change, Sylas was even more eager to unlock basic Etherflow. If he had a conduit to feed his madness through, how much more powerful would his telekinesis become? Sylas' eyes opened. I wonder if I can use this on basic scouting as well. After his comprehension session, Sylas had come to understand that all things that relied on stats related to charisma and could be enhanced with his madness comprehension. Basic scouting fell right into that wheelhouse. So, the first thing he used it on was Maddened Enlightenment. Maddened Enlightenment, FF+. You are deeply in tune with the madness of your ancestors. It helps you to focus, relax, and form a oneness with the world. Understanding yourself is a form of peace, but understanding your place in the world makes you enlightened. Interesting, there's no change. Sylas didn't believe that this was because it didn't work, but rather because he was trying to find out something through the use of basic scouting that it wasn't designed to do. Either that, or there was really nothing else to see. Then what about blade aura? Sylas had never been able to see even a description for blade aura. He wondered if that was just natural, but he could see one for tail whip and sudden burst if he wanted, so that shouldn't be it. To his surprise, it worked. Blade aura, gene talent. A gene talent capable of adding the effects of pierce and rigid to any blade. Ability, pierce, mutated. Makes applied strength 25% more effective. Ability, rigid, mutated. Increases applied constitution by 25%, increasing rigidity of opposite force and forcing the enemy to withstand the brunt. Sylas was intrigued. So that was why he had been able to pummel the spitting cobra so easily. His strength was the 25% more effective, so though it wasn't exactly the same, it was almost like he had 63 strength instead of 50. At the same time, rigid was extremely interesting. Every force had an equal and opposite force. So, the harder Sylas punched, the stronger the rebound he experienced was. Rigid was able to not only increase his constitution by 25%, but it was also able to lessen the rebound he experienced, transferring it over to his enemy. This was effectively yet another strength increase. Essentially, it was like his enemy was getting his with a nigh immovable force every time he punched or kicked them. Or, at the very least, it was something close. In Sylas' opinion, rigid was actually far better applied to his pugilist path than it was to a blade. It seemed like something more effective when used for blunt impact. It was just that there were probably very few who could accept blade aura into their bodies without boiling themselves up from the inside out. It's time to go. Sylas opened up the dungeon map again. There was a perfect replica of the maze on it. He could easily see the perfect path to take through it. There were 9 bosses in the dungeon, but if you chose the optimal path, you only had to face off against 3 of them. Then, when you stepped out of the maze, you would have to battle 1 more. In addition to the bosses, there were several minion-type beasts scattered, and Sylas could actually watch their movements just like he could on a video game map. The question was whether he should go for the optimum path or not. Any animals in this dungeon would definitely have excellent genes to take advantage of, and it would be a controlled environment, unlike the outside world. Well, let's check out the strength of these animals before I make such a decision. Sylas chose the optimal route. After locking onto the location of the creature in question, he peeked around the corner. He fused his madness with basic scouting and peeked around the corner. Now that he had learned to rein in his madness, he didn't need to worry about being discovered and used it more freely. Basilisk Minor F. Level 3. Physical 52. Strength 72. Constitution 74. Dexterity 31. Speed 31. Mental 49. Intelligence 74. Wisdom 8. Charisma 65. Will 38. Sylas' brows raised. He could see the actual stat breakdown now. This was more than what he expected, and also far more useful. Rather than having to deduce the advantages of a creature, he could see them as plain as day and approach with that thought in mind. He could skip the probing. Sylas pulled out the dungeon map again and waited patiently. There was no need to get into a battle. He didn't have to. He just had to wait for the perfect chance. Its constitution is 74. If I activate Madness and use the Pierce Dagger, I'll have an effective strength of 160. Piercing it will be easy. Now, Sylas acted the instant the Basilisk Minor turned its back. It was a beautiful snake, Sylas had to admit. It was covered in black scales and had veins of gold on its head, forming a crown. It didn't have the hood of a cobra, but its spine, jaw, and tail were covered in bony, golden spikes that reflected like polished brass. It would be a dangerous creature to fight head-on, especially if it had half the skills of the spitting cobra creature outside. But he didn't have to. A dagger flashed and buried itself into the back of the creature's skull, slipping right between its bone spikes, severing its spinal cord and slicing its brain apart in an instant. The creature froze and then slowly fell to the ground, unable to fight back. Sylas checked the map to double-check the coast was clear. Then he rushed forward, placing a hand on the creature. Basilisk Minor. Gene detected. Common gene. 3. Intelligence F. Attempt assimilation? Yes, no. Sylas was disappointed again. He had met the requirements for unlocking the common version of basic Etherflow long ago, but there was no way he was going to waste such a rare item like that when he was so close. There were just 5 charisma genes left. If this dungeon panned out, he would be able to gather the last genes he needed to unlock his first bronze gene. This is consistent with the first dungeon I entered. These minion-type monsters will only provide one type of gene, but the bosses should provide multiple, and thus will give me a better chance of getting exactly what I want. If I keep using this strategy, clearing out the mobs will be easy enough. I would only have to tire myself out facing the bosses themselves. In that case, I could be more bold with how I approach this and clear out the whole maze. I'll still with this optimal path for now. It's still possible that the bosses will be too much for me to handle. I can double back later if things go well. With that, Sylas took his time, collecting one minion corpse after another. Luckily, because he didn't really need to worry about ether consumption, he was able to raise it to a 5 cubic meter size. That was the equivalent of the current Sylas draining his ether around 18 times. If he didn't have Madden Enlightenment, that is, with it, he could replenish his ether even while walking in a little under 5 minutes. If he redirected the ether flow from himself to the ring itself, it only took less than an hour and a half to bring it to that size. And since it only lost 20% of its size every day, Sylas only needed to invest barely a quarter hour a day to keep it at its current size. Thanks to this, he had more than enough space to store these carcasses for now. It would have been more useful to use the Madness Key, but until he found a method to keep its hunger in check, this was just going to have to be the way from now on. Outside the dungeon, These damned snakes. Why the hell are there so many of them? You know why. There's a dungeon nearby. A group of 4 walked in formation. At the helm, a man wielding a round shield wrapped in leather took the vanguard. His ether spread out and expanded the range of his defenses. To his back, there were 3 spear wielders. The group was formed of 2 men and 2 women, and their teamwork seemed to be decent. At the very least, the snakes, even with their larger numbers, were unable to penetrate their ranks. The defensive shield of ether didn't seem to block the attacks of the spears at all, so they moved forward unfazed, relying on their anchor to press forward. Soon, they came across a group of 5-meter-long, spitting cobras, and a more substantial battle broke out. Even so, it was only a matter of half an hour before the battle was through. You know the rules. Keep the corpses fresh in the team storage ring. Once we get some decent gene state elixirs, we'll have a go at it. The shield man spoke blandly, more so out of formality. You're sure this is it? One of the women said, looking at the dungeon ahead. The informant said it would be much harder to make it to this point, so why was it so easy? Can't fake a dungeon. Now, can they? Who knows what that informant can do? They're raking in all this cash, just sitting on their asses all day. They obviously have no fighting power, or else they would be gobbling up all these opportunities on their own. They probably just don't have a good measure of strength, the other woman replied. The group seemed to accept this answer, and were taking a small break before the shield man cursed. Fuck, this dungeon has a 2-person entry limit. An entry limit? What the hell is that? I've never seen that before, the second man responded. Well, it's right there. Look for yourself. Holy shit, double F plus dungeon. The first woman cried out. Something's fishy here, the shield man frowned. The informant didn't say anything about an entry limit. Also didn't say anything about this dungeon being so strong, either. What's the catch here? The price we paid was heavy, but not heavy enough for this. The group fell into silence. Retreat, the second man asked. The silence turned to faces of hesitation. They all knew the value of a dungeon. It was the easiest and most systematic way of gaining genes. And they also almost always had gene state elixirs, probably the most valuable commodity in this world now. Roll for entry. They spoke at the same time. Sylas pressed his back against the cool stone. He had gotten used to going around shirtless these days, but he felt that he should probably get some real clothes at some point. There had to be items out there that could enhance his stats, but wouldn't be considered to be armor by the Scorn Raps. His dagger suddenly moved in a blinding flash, killing another minion. I can definitely use my madness for much longer periods of time now. If I was in the same situation as before, I would have already run out and been forced to use Madden Enlightenment more seriously. But I guess that makes sense. Since I'm not spilling out the influence of my comprehension everywhere, it's taking less of a toll on me. Sylas put the carcass away after double-checking that it was still only giving intelligence genes. I'll fight the next minion. They should mirror the abilities of the boss to some extent, so it'll be good to prepare. With that thought, Sylas followed the path set by the dungeon map and swiftly found the next minion. This should be the last one before the boss. It was also convenient to fight it because there were no other threats in the immediate area. He had already cleared them all, while the boss was unable to leave its designated area. Basilisk Minor F. Level 3. Physical, 52. Strength, 73. Constitution, 75. Dexterity, 32. Speed, 30. Mental, 49. Intelligence, 72. Wisdom, 8. Charisma, 67. Will, 41. Sylas took a breath and rounded the corner. A dagger hovered behind his back, out of view of the snake, and had already entered a battle stance. The basilisk minion unleashed a shriek and hissed, slithering forward with great speed. It wasn't the largest snake he had come across in this world, but its 3-meter length was still significant. Sylas was cautious about closing the distance, and he dodged out of the way of the snake's attempts to get a bite out of him. When it realized its speed and dexterity were too far inferior to Sylas' own, his yellow slit eyes suddenly glowed and became a slight shade of crimson, almost as though some droplets of food color had fallen into it. The feeling of something clawing at his mind almost overwhelmed Sylas. It was similar to when others tried to get a read on his stats, but far more invasive, almost as though the creature was trying to suffocate him with its will. In the instant his mind went blank for a moment, the bone-barbed tail of the basilisk miner was already swinging for his head. Sylas must have recovered faster than it expected, because when the creature saw the human's eyes sharpen, it hissed. A single hit of that tail had enough strength to knock Sylas out. But if the bone spikes were also taken into account, it would practically be an instant death. Sudden burst. Sylas dodged forward and to the left, out of the way of the tail, swinging to his right. The snake bit his head, but the dagger hidden behind him suddenly flashed and tore right into its mouth. However, just when Sylas thought that dagger would rip into its skull from the inside, the creature bit down, its teeth shimmering with ether as it crushed the dagger into pieces. Sylas frowned, but his follow-up punch wasn't slow. Madness and blade aura circulated, a slight coating of red covering him as slammed a powerful fist right into the snake's throat. Bang! The snake slid backward. Between the 10% increase of constitution from the scorned wraps and the enhancement from rigid, so long as it wasn't the bone spikes, Sylas had no fear of clashing head-on with this beast. Even so, thoughts were swirling in his mind. The dagger has a durability limit of its own. It was only level 2, and it can only take so much punishment with how strong my telekinesis is. Sylas was already finding that his daggers lost 1 point of durability every time he attacked these creatures with strong constitutions. He had luckily traded for a half-dozen total, expecting such a thing, but he had already lost one when he had yet to beat a single boss. Even so, he knew this was necessary. He had to be prepared for what the boss had to offer. I'll have to switch over to the restore daggers so that I can deal with the durability issues. It'll be hard to pierce these snakes, but at least I can use my ether to repair them. As Sylas thought, he didn't forget to follow up. He and the basilisk minion entered a dance where Sylas lost himself, sliding out of the way of attacks and fiercely countering. The more he battled, the easier he found it. His sense of the world was so much greater with Maddened Enlightenment activated, and the control he had over his body with Madness was even clearer now regardless of the fact he hadn't activated Madness control. It was a bit weird, actually. This flow of battle state felt somehow connected to his madness, and not at the same time, almost as though it was a child being suppressed under the umbrella of something much larger. But Sylas didn't mind it. He truly didn't have the time to mind it, even if he wanted to. The day that child could come out from the umbrella of its elder brother, maybe it would have already become something that could match madness. Bang! The head of the basilisk rebounded against the stone wall like a bouncing ball, and the last bits of light in its eyes faded away. Sylas exhaled a slow breath and looked at his fists. Even with blade aura, his lethality was lacking considerably if his telekinesis were discounted. Soon, he would have to figure out a method of doing some real damage with his body. These long, protracted battles would make him pay a heavy price someday, even though it helped him get acclimated to the flow of battle with greater ease. He checked the corpse, and, after confirming the same thing he had the last half-dozen times, he moved toward the location of the boss. The area up ahead was almost identical to the location he had started in, a circular space with 3 entries, though one of them led to a dead end, while the one he stood in front of now led back to the starting position. The created with was curled into a tight spiral, its head resting atop its coils. It was a 10-meter-long version of the minions that Sylas had come across until now, and it had horns. Basilisk Minor, F+. Level 4. Physical, 60. Strength, 81. Constitution, 83. Dexterity, 40. Speed, 38. Mental, 55. Intelligence, 78. Wisdom, 14. Charisma, 73. Will, 48. Sylas took a step forward, and the creature stirred. It opened its eyes, and unlike its companions, there were already flecks of red in its yellow irises. The hiss sounded like the howl of a steam engine as the creature rose to its full height. Sylas was forced to look up as it did so. The strength of the basilisk's core muscles seemed to be far beyond that of Big Madness. While the latter could only mostly slither on the ground with most of its body rooted to the earth, at least half of the basilisk's body rose up tall, looming almost 3 meters above Sylas' head. Unlike the other beasts, it didn't attack Sylas immediately. It loomed tall and proud, as though disdaining his presence. And then it will press down. Sylas looked up indifferently. His hair rustled slightly as though a breeze had just passed by, but he felt nothing else at all. After feeling the attack of the lesser minion, Sylas had already grasped how to counter it. His madness gave him full control over himself. That was precisely what it pursued. Absolute freedom at the constant of perfect understanding of oneself. The most protected portion of Sylas' body was his mind. The earlier slip-up that almost lost him his head was just a poor application of his madness comprehension. It wouldn't happen again. The snake that fancied itself a king was immediately enraged by Sylas' indifference. Sylas could feel the fury emitting from it, almost as though they were palpable waves. A tail whip shot out with extreme speed, closing the distance between it and Sylas' head in an instant. Sylas took a step back and ducked, but his heart skipped a beat when he felt a rush of ether. The tail changed its momentum instantaneously, going from a sideways motion to mirror the downward stroke of a sledgehammer. Sylas, who had already bent down to duck, suddenly found himself cornered. It didn't make any sense. That sort of movement broke any laws of common sense. Sylas already knew that sudden burst wouldn't be fast enough. If he tried, his torso might make it, but his legs would be crushed. By then, he'd only be able to wait for death. His mind moved with an inhuman swiftness, and he could practically feel his heart pumping. This feeling, he loved it. Bang! Sylas activated madness, blade aura, and madness control all at once. At the same time, he pulled on his spatial treasure, taking out the carcass of the elite spitting cobra and blocking overhead. He crossed his arms, shielding his head, and as a final measure, he pushed out his telekinesis in a wild stream, doing everything he could to slow the blow. A tremendous pressure descended on him with a might that drove one of his knees to the ground. He grit his teeth, moving the instant he felt the pressure alleviate. He rolled to the side, the roar of the basilisk like the sounds of victory in his mind. However, he snapped out of that frame instantly. The rage of the basilisk was a tonic that filled him with pleasure, but it was also a reminder that it was very much still alive. Sylas jumped into battle, his movements far more agile. He advanced and retreated smoothly, pulling at the air with maddened enlightenment to quickly replenish his ether stores. This snake is slow, but its attack speed is much better. That skill also allows it to change the direction of its attack on a dime, without losing any strength or momentum. Sylas could no longer confidently dodge until he was getting well out of the range of the basilisk's attack. The only path to victory seemed to be his daggers, but if he used them to kill this basilisk, then what about the next boss? And the one after that? He hadn't had enough money to buy more than the half dozen he had brought, and now one was already destroyed. This boss had over 80 constitution. One attack might take out as many as 3 durability, and if he wasn't using the pierce daggers, it would be hard to even injure this beast. Sylas dodged out of a swinging tail, trying to figure something out. The beast was just too large. The only way he could kill it with fists and kicks would be by assaulting its head directly, but how could he do that with any sort of ease if it was meters above his head? Roar! The basilisk was completely furious. Its prey was so slippery that it couldn't get a proper hit. When had its dignity as a king of snakes ever been challenged in this way? Its eyes flashed with a bright red, and Sylas felt that gathering of ether. The beast came to a sudden halt and loomed even taller, a mighty presence descending and suffocating Sylas from all sides. Sylas felt his body slow for a moment. This was definitely the same skill the minion had used, but on a completely different level. He broke free of it with a slight push of his intention, accelerating out of the way even faster. A skill, but why does it feel so much like telekinesis? Sylas' eyes opened wide, as though he had just realized that he had overlooked something. He was obsessed with using his telekinesis on everything else, But why had he never tried to use it on his ether? He knew why, of course. It was because it didn't seem to make sense to. He couldn't project ether out of his body anyway. He could only circulate it within himself and activate a skill based on that. In fact, it wasn't even technically him actively circulating his ether in the first place. It was much more like a video game, as though the system felt he was too stupid to do it on his own. So he had to move his intention toward a particular skill like he was pressing a button on a keyboard, and then it would do it for him. It was said that intelligence decided how well your ether flowed. These were the words his grandfather had told him. But until this point, it seemed that intelligence's main function was actually just to decide how much ether you had. Even if there was a part to play in controlling the energy, Sylas had long realized just how much these stats overlapped. And when he thought to that point, how could will and charisma, two stats designed to decide how well you could impact the outside world, not be related to your ether control as well? The reason why this skill felt so much like telekinesis to him was because it was. He almost couldn't believe that he hadn't noticed it earlier. Just a different form of it, in which case, Sylas suddenly stopped gliding backward, his hips dropping as he erupted with a punch. The air clapped as though something had just compressed it to an extreme, and right then, an entire 10 meters away, the basilisk's head snapped back, a roar of pain coming from its maw. Sylas' green irises lit up. Just now, he had broken through his usual 10-pound limit. However, the drain on his ether had been substantial. He felt like he could only send on less than 10 of those attacks. Even with Madden Enlightenment activated, his pitifully low ether just couldn't keep up. But that was a problem for future Sylas. Right now, he wanted this victory. He sent out another 2 quick punches, putting his entire strength behind both before he suddenly unleashed Tail Whip. It felt like a scythe had cut through the air. The telekinesis-fueled kick landed with such strength that the basilisk's head snapped downward, rebounding against the ground. Sylas exploded forth, stepping onto the head of the beast and pressing downward. It was as though his weight had increased by a factor of 100, the freeness of his ether under the control of his telekinesis, making him feel as though he had the strength to level mountains. The jaw of the basilisk shattered as it was pressed against the ground. Its tail tried to reach Sylas, but the angle was far too awkward for it to aim at its own head, and Sylas took full advantage, driving a fist right through its eye that sent a pulse rippling through its skull. Sylas' eyes shone like 2 bright orbs. That feeling was amazing. Honestly, even until now, this world felt so grounded. Even though he could control flying daggers with his mind, he never really felt that fantasy world he was in until now. Using his ether and telekinesis together felt like he was making his will more tangible. He could directly transfer the strength of his body to any target within his original 20-meter range. The difference was that, unlike his telekinesis, the power output diminished the further away from him. It was as it ate up its own momentum. Basic ether flow. Ether comes naturally to you, even when it's outside of your body. Your ability to extend your ether away from your core, attaching it to objects to control and wield, far exceeds others. The description of basic ether flow came to Sylas' mind, and he felt that he had overlooked the obvious for too long. Basic ether flow was clearly a clue in this direction, but he had overlooked it. The other 2 bronze genes I had to choose from: Psyche Warp and Harmonic Puppetry. They're both also abilities that I already have access to. Psyche Warp is an assault on the minds of others, and my comprehension can naturally do that. Harmonic Puppetry is an elite control over the body, and I can also do that already as well. I should have seen this already. Sylas felt like kicking himself. Had he realized this already, he wouldn't have struggled so much until this point. There was so much more potential in his telekinesis than he had gotten out of it until now. These bronze genes weren't just a method of unlocking new abilities. In fact, by definition, they were designed to enhance abilities that he already had. That was why a foundation had to be chosen first. Etherflow was already an ability he had. He just hadn't used it yet because it hadn't occurred to him. If he unlocked the bronze gene basic Etherflow, this ability of his and its clear limitations might be alleviated substantially. At the very least, it would become far more powerful than it was now. I want to understand this first. Sylas did a few calculations and had a small Q&A with the madness key before he felt that he dialed everything in. In the end, he had come to understand a few things. A skill required a circulation pattern to activate. This circulation pattern was essentially a message to one's ether to perform in a specific way. However, with telekinesis, Sylas could bypass this necessity, directly dictating the actions of his ether to act as he wanted it to. Essentially, every time he did this, he was using a skill without necessarily using a skill. That said, there were drawbacks to this as well. Without the form of a tried and tested skill, his ether was reliant on what was essentially Sylas' crude projections. Well, the projection of his will was actually near perfect because of his ability to visualize his surroundings. The problem was actually a limitation of training. Sylas was still a layman in terms of combat, and though he was improving greatly every day, he still had a lot to learn. As such, whenever he threw out a punch or kick, his ether was mapping onto his limited skill, and thus the power output was limited as a result. As things stood, if his punches were to rank like a skill, they wouldn't even be F-. Even so, they were extraordinarily powerful. The combination of Sylas' physical, his ether, and his combined will and charisma stats made the output, or his ether flow, incredibly powerful. When his madness was activated, his telekinesis could output 82 physical. His own physical was 50. Without accounting for the scale of diminishing returns as his ether flow got further from him, in its maximum range, the output was the average of the two, which was 66. However, there then came a multiplicative effect due to the addition of ether. One could essentially expect around a 10% boost in ability from an F skill at the base fragmented mastery level. It could go to around 40% upon reaching legendary mastery.